Well, I see that it's 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. First item is roll call. Looks like everyone is here, noting that Travis is absent. First item on the agenda is the approval of the April 8th, 2019 minutes. Are there any corrections or comments to the minutes from the last meeting? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Next item is the approval of the agenda. And I guess for those in the audience, the agendas are located on the back shelf there in the bookshelf. Looks like we have 26 items on the agenda today. Are there any changes or comments to the agenda for today? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion for approval.
I so move.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Consent agenda.
Good morning, Commissioners. PJ Conover, Director of Planning Department. Quite a few items on the consent today. The following items have been placed on the consent agenda for action to be taken on all items in accordance with staff's recommendation by a single vote. Any item may be removed from consent agenda by any planning commissioner, staff member, or audience member for separate consideration. The findings of the Planning Commission are recommendations to the County Board of Commissioners who make the final decisions. Item 3, conditional use permit review 1319 for Ken and Corey Tomovic, Strata Bowl Vacation Homes LLC, to review a recreational resort to allow for events of 20 people or less in a general agriculture district. Staff recommends to continue the review of conditional use permit 1319 to the May 28, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. Item 4, conditional use permit review 1502 for Valerie Naylor to review an accessory structure, which is a garage, prior to a primary structure in a general agriculture district. Staff recommends approval of the extension of conditional use permit 1502 with 6 conditions. Item 5, conditional use permit review 1628 for Chase and Leslie Larson to review a recreational resort area on a subject property in a general agriculture district. Staff recommends approval of the extension of conditional use permit 1628 with 18 conditions. Item 6, conditional use permit 1629 for Highmark Incorporated to review a contractor storage yard on the subject property during the construction of Rapid City Southside Sewer Line Project, which is located in a limited agriculture district. Staff recommends to end conditional use permit 1629 with the applicant's concurrence. Item 7, conditional use permit review 0711 for Bernard Ness, Ronnie Ness is the agent, to review an auto repair business in a general agriculture district. Staff recommends to continue the review of conditional use permit 0711 to the July 22nd, 2019 Planning Commission meeting with 1 condition. Item 8, conditional use permit review 1738 for Daniel Johnson, Highmark Properties, to review a multifamily dwelling in a general agriculture district. Staff recommends to continue the review of conditional use permit 1738 until such a time that the applicant addresses the inadequate sizing of the on-site wastewater treatment system. Item 9, conditional use permit review 1745 for Gold Run III LLC, Greg Wittenberg is the agent, to review an existing caboose to be used as a seasonal dwelling on the subject property in a limited agriculture district. Staff recommends approval of the extension of conditional use permit 1745 with 8 conditions. Item 10, conditional use permit review 1830 for Hayden Clark to review a single-wide mobile home to be used as a single-family residence on the subject property in a general agriculture district. Staff recommends approval of the extension of conditional use permit 1830 with 5 conditions. Item 11, conditional use permit review 1838 for Daniel Johnson, Highmark Properties LLC, to review the multifamily dwelling with separate units, Unit 1 and Unit 2, to be used as a special resort / vacation home rental in a general agriculture district. Staff recommends to continue the review of conditional use permit 1838 until such a time as the applicant addresses the inadequate sizing of the on-site wastewater treatment system. Item 12, conditional use permit 1904 for Dean and Patricia Farr to allow for a vacation home rental on the subject property in suburban residential district. Staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit 1904 with 14 conditions. Item 13, construction permit review 1804 for Stromer Properties LLC. Brooke Stromer is the agent to review the construction of a parking area on the subject property. Staff recommends to continue the review of construction permit 1804 to the May 13th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting to allow staff time to contact the applicant. Item 14, construction permit 0904 for Rockerville Gold, where am I here? Sorry, let's start over again. Construction permit, that should be 1904, not 0904, for Rockerville Gold Town LLC to strip off topsoil for exploratory purposes for future development. Staff recommends approval of construction permit 1904 with 11 conditions. Item 15, minor plat 1847 and subdivision regulation variances 1814 for Brett and Linda Hilgeman to create lots A and B of Nautilus Acres subdivision number 2 and to waive platting requirements. Staff recommends to end subdivision regulation variance 1804 and minor plat 1847 per the applicant's request.
Are there any items that staff wishes to pull from the consent agenda?
Item 12, item 14.
Are there any items that the membership would like to pull from the agenda? Okay. For the audience, the consent agenda are items that we will all vote on and with one vote. And those include items 3 through 15. Are there any items that the people in the audience would like to hear separately and not be voted on? If you'd like to speak to any of the items between 3 through 15, please come to the podium and give me your name and which item you'd like to have pulled.
Yes, this is in regards to, I believe, items 8 and 11. First of all, I'd like to say just good morning, commissioners and the staff. My name is Daniel Johnson. My wife and I own the property that's being discussed in items 8 and 11 about the adequacy of the septic system.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, we will talk about the items separately. We just need to know whether or not to pull them from the consent agenda.
Okay.
So I'll call them back up when those items come up.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you. So the consent agenda is items 3 through 7, 9 and 10, 13 and 15. Are there any other items? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion for approval of the items less the ones that I called out.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. Those items carry.
Thank you.
Moves us to item 8. Sir, please come back up.
So again, I'm Daniel Johnson. My wife and I own this property. We live in Yankton, but this is a vacation home that we have. I thank you all for the chance to address the concerns that the planning department has about the adequacy of the septic system. I furthermore thank the planning department for their being a watchdog for the water quality in Spring Creek. I have a acreage there that's 1.8 acres. The western edge of it is Spring Creek. I know there's been some real concerns with E. coli contamination in Spring Creek, and I applaud the efforts to protect this water system. I think that I have a solution to the problem. In getting ready for this, I did reach out to South Dakota DENR and talked to one of the wastewater engineers there. And he said this situation has come up before, that although I've had on 3 separate occasions approval of this septic system for a capacity of 4 bedrooms, total of 8 people on 3 separate occasions, I didn't understand, like, why is the state saying it's okay, but the county is saying it's not? And he said it all boils down to the way that the the law is written, that there's, and it's 74530120. There's a table 2 that can be utilized to establish what the wastewater flow capacity is, depending on what kind of property it is. There's different categories. The state has elected in vacation homes like this to treat them as what are called resort cabins. And the table states that that'll, on average, be about 60 gallons of water per person per day. And my capacity of this system is 480 gallons. So that 60 gallons times 8 people would be 480, be right on the numbers. They believe that's a realistic way to evaluate these because they realize they aren't used as much as regular residences. People aren't there as much. And what the county is elected to do is treat it more like a duplex, like there's 2 apartments, 4 people above, 4 people below, both as residents there all the time. And that's just simply not the way it's used, and nor will it ever be used that way as long as I own the property. Last year, because I do have a vacation rental there with a maximum capacity of 6 people per night, I've been able to track exactly how many people are there and how many nights. And last year, there were 110 nights that it was occupied. Personally, we occupied it 70 nights of the year. Most of that's between May and September. So I had utilization 180 nights last year, so about 50% usage. When the county has looked at it, they're using a number of 75 gallons per person per night. And that's more of a residential use, like 2 apartments. And what the engineer said is that another part of this law is that if you have a meter on your water system, you can tell exactly how much water is going in the septic system. You don't have to, make guesstimations based on table 2. And he said there's a gentleman here in Rapid City area who used to own Hills Septic. His name is Eugene Solseth, and he still does consulting work to address exactly these types of situations where there's a quandary, what is the actual load on the septic system? It would involve getting a meter. It would mean having him monitor it, keeping track of exactly how many people are there and how many days. And then there's a formula in the state law that you can calculate the average usage, and then you multiply it times 1.5, so there's a safety factor built in there. And what I would propose is let me go ahead and just continue to use the vacation rental as I have done this past year with 6 people maximum. And then let me hire Mr. Solseth to be the consultant to put a meter on the system. Let me keep the numbers and basically just bring the data back after the summer season, because busy months are May, June, and July. Into August, it starts to trail off, but I think I can answer exactly how much usage there is on the system. And then if it's, shows that there's no way this could handle 8 people, then I'll accept that. But if it shows that the usage is much less than that, then I would like to be able to use the property to the way I designed it to be used. Renting the upstairs is going to be a very infrequent thing. That's where we keep our personal stuff. But there are times of the year, like during rally and stuff like that, when it would be good to be able to do that. So that would be my proposed solution, to study this a little bit more, be more quantitative, and realize that the appliances that go into homes now, the toilets that are much more efficient. This law is from 1996. A lot has changed in that time. I have an article from Washington Post that shows water usage is way down, and South Dakota is one of the better states. So I think I can prove, if you let me, that my water utilization is not putting undue strain on this system, and I'm not compromising Spring Creek water quality. So that would be my proposal. And I'd take any questions if you have any.
Any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I sat down yesterday and I went over this quite thoroughly. At 8 rooms, 8 persons, 60 gallons a day, that's 480. Take that times 365. This is the potential. This is the potential load that that thing's designed for. That's 175,200 gallons a year. So hypothetically, I ran, what if we had 10 people in there and we still used the 60 gallons a day? And that comes out to, then what I did is, in Dan's information, he said that last year it was about, these vacation rentals run about 50%. I used 80%. So they did, hypothetically, if we have 10 people at 80%, 60 gallons, and run that, it comes out to 175.2. It's the same amount of water being used. And then if we, you mentioned that a lot of these folks, they eat out. They don't do as much in-house cooking. So I factored that by 10%, and I come out at 157,680, opposed to the potential load of 175.2. So that gave me a comfort level. Then I figured out how we gonna monitor this, because it's water going in, and the way a city figures out their water bill, it's the amount of water that goes into the septic or the sewer system. So I came up with the same solution. I said, let's put a meter on there. I worked with water meters, and that would tell you exactly what the load is, and then the county monitored that. And like you say, and we wouldn't want that expense, but you've already come to that solution. I can mention a couple other contractors that'd be more than happy to put that meter in and monitor it, so that it wasn't our responsibility. And maybe more frequent inspections on the system to make sure that it's not being compromised. So I think personally, I would like to work with Dan on this. I think the meter's a good step before we get too restrictive.
And I did 3 days ago, I had the system pumped. It had never had been, because it's only been used between 2 to 3 years. And Southern Hills Septic pumped it. They said there was minimal sediments in the septic tank, that the baffles in the intake and outtake are working perfectly well. The system's functioning very well, just as it was designed. And I think what the planning department has done is they've kind of taken the worst case scenario if people were there all the time, and that's just not the way. These are really much more like motels and cabins, and they don't get utilized to that degree. So that's.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have a question. Right now, is it approved for 6 people per night from staff?
Good morning, Brittany Molitor, Environmental Planning Supervisor. Currently, right now, it's approved for 8 people in the structure. I kind of did some calculations to go over just some concerns that the planning staff has is with the meter. Right now, the basement is the only portion supposedly that's being rented out. So we wouldn't know what the impact is if the multifamily residence, the upstairs was rented out during, say, the rally. In addition, when we look at sizing of septics, we look at the peak flow, the worst case scenario. That's kind of the point of it. So that's what we look at, is the peak flow. What is the worst case scenario that this system can be taxed for over a period of time, that it can handle the situation. The septic system that's out there right now is a mound system because they have high groundwater in the area. There was an original system that was put in prior to any structure being built, but that system was actually in groundwater. It was a conventional system, so they had to switch it to a mound system. When we did the calculations, we did look, the lower level right now is being rented out at 6 people. We did pull up, this was the original site plan, or the interior plan that was submitted by him. The main floor, he shows 6 adults and 2 children. And then in the lower level, he showed 6 adults. And then here is the advertisement for that lower level, that sleeping 6. This is on the VRBO website. And then this is the calendar that shows the days that it's been rented already so far this year. So it looks like it's being rented quite frequently throughout the year. So that's where staff is coming from in these calculations. I do have a. Okay, so here is kind of a spreadsheet that we had put together. Okay, sorry. That TJ and I worked on to kind of go over what the peak flow would be. Worst case scenario again. Typically in vacation homes, it is usually during the rally. So that's kind of where we came up with the calculations. If you look at the three bottom ones, is the vacation home rental being utilized, top and bottom, it still comes out to the 723 square feet, the multifamily and the recreational resort. Because currently, as it's being advertised today, the basement is being advertised for 6 people. There's 2 bedrooms upstairs. We assume 2 people per bedroom. That's standard across the board, how we look at sizing of septics for everyone in the county. So, and he is correct that you can do the metering. My only concern is that by asking to have the upper level being part of the rental, we wouldn't have that information. We would only have the information for the lower level. So how to take that into consideration for the overall sizing, it would be difficult unless it's actually utilized the whole structure to get a good number.
Do we know, though, if the meter is on the primary water service coming in, so it would meter whatever water was coming into the building?
It would, but right now, the way that it stands, because the upper level isn't approved for any other like vacation or anything, it's just for personal use at this point. Technically, how he's advertising it and how utilizing it for personal use, it's still undersized by our rules, because we don't have the metering information.
So at this time, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Say, Brittany, let me get this straight. We got the well goes into pressure tank, and then from the pressure tank, that's the main water line to the house.
Right, but what I'm saying is currently, right now, it's only approved to rent the basement. And then the upstairs is for personal use. What he's asking for is to utilize the upper level as a vacation home rental, so the whole structure is a specialty resort. We haven't approved that yet, or I shouldn't say, the board hasn't approved that yet, the planning commission hasn't approved that yet. So even if you meter it, it's only for the current use that's, as it's being utilized right now, which is the vacation home rental in the basement.
I guess my question is, no matter how it's used, as long as that meter doesn't show more water going in than what your projections are, wouldn't that be another way that we could make the assumption that that thing's not being overused by gauging the water action, whether it's going to the lower level or the upper level? That meter catches that water before it goes to either level.
Right, but the upper level hasn't been approved for the use that he's
So
asking
then what
for
would
yet.
the process be to approve it so that we could just at least try to work with Dan on this?
So staff's concern would be then, what if it does tax it and it fails? So then now we've created a situation that we have a failing system. This system is somewhat close to the creek. Like I said, I think it barely met the minimum setback requirements to the creek. So that's where staff is coming from. We typically, when we do the metering, it's after an established use has been in place for a considerable amount of time, which this hasn't been that way. I think the vacation home rental's been for a year or less. Maybe last season was the first season that it was utilized.
I don't know, I'm just thinking as a vacation rental, I have to agree with Dan, as a vacation rental, it uses, on a yearly basis, I would assume that it would use a lot less water than if it was a family occupying 4 bedrooms 365 days a year. I would just think that the vacation rental, if we were specific on that would actually be less burden on that septic system.
Well, it may be over the year, but we don't look at it that way. It's based on peak flow. So like on a day-to-day peak flow, that's how it's calculated. The other issue is when we approve these things, we don't assume who the owner is. We assume what the use is, because these conditional uses run with the property. So if this property was ever sold, another owner or operator could use it in a different way. So then that's how we have to look at it overall, not just by the current operator.
Now, what's the solution in your opinion?
To upgrade the septic. In most cases, that's what we've required of other people. In instances where they wanted to have a vacation home rental where they
And if we went that route, then how would that impact his current business?
Well, he could still utilize the bottom, but not rent out the top, you know? I mean, because that's what he's asking for. That's what the two requests are for a multifamily dwelling. That's what the two requests are, and to create the VHR specialty resort for the ability to rent the upper portion.
So in essence, if he wants to use that upper portion the way it stands today, he would have to add 129 square feet to that mound system. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's the calculations from the on-site wastewater specialist.
How big of a job is that?
He would have to talk to a septic installer. Those kinds of jobs vary,
Okay.
prices based on the,
Just looking at all the options.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Brittany, I understand your practice of using peak flow. I mean, that does make some sense to me. But I also agree that in all likelihood, given the nature of this, vacation home rentals and so on, it's not going to use the amount of water that's projected for residential units. So, I mean, I would think that these meters would have instantaneous kind of daily flow rates. So you could tell on every given day how much water was being used coming into the home, which therefore would have to go out of the home, regardless of if there were 2 bedrooms occupied or all 8 occupied or, whatnot. But, I mean, couldn't this be such that, this would be a good test summer? And, I'd like to speak with, Mr. Johnson to find out, would it be possible to get, at least weekly reports from the meter so that if indeed it started exceeding the amount, you'd have to curtail it. And so we really would have real data. And, daily might seem a little bit much, but I would certainly think that weekly reports could be done. And then you could really kind of nip it in the bud if indeed it was starting to exceed the capacity.
right, and I believe that's a good solution for the bottom, but it wouldn't take into account the top, how,
But why wouldn't it?
because we haven't approved him utilizing that as a
No,
vacation
well,
home
I-
rental.
Well, we aren't going to know what the top uses until it's rented.
Correct, but in order for us to approve it, we have certain requirements in our ordinance for the septic to be sized correctly.
Yes, but I guess, okay, so excuse me, I interrupted, I'm sorry. But it strikes me is that the calculation could be done based upon, real-time monitoring data as to what a realistic number is in terms of gallons per bedroom or in the rental, in the vacation home rental. And then the approval could be based upon an extrapolation of that to see if there's room, for approving the upstairs. Is that what you're saying? You need to, because in other words, the numbers that we get, it could include the owner staying up there or no?
Right now, even right now, as it stands right now, how he is renting it with the 6 people, with the 2 bedrooms upstairs, it's still undersized. Because he has 6 people in the basement as a vacation home rental, he has it advertised that way, and it's booked for a majority of the summer with that intention. And then he has 2 bedrooms upstairs, which the state administrative rules in that table 2 assumes 2 people per bedroom. So that's 10 people. So it's still undersized. It's still into that 723 requirement.
That's right. So what's your just scenario? So the upstairs could be occupied. It couldn't be rented, but it could be occupied. The current status right now
By the owner.
by the
Correct.
owner. And then the lower level could be rented to the 6 people. And so by getting the real-time monitoring on the water usage, why couldn't that be used to kind of examine what the situation would be if the upstairs were approved to be a vacation home rental?
It could, but you're asking to approve it prior to actually having what's in place. We don't have those numbers, so we don't even know what the bottom is doing to even make that extrapolation for the top. I mean, we don't have enough information to do that. Oh. Yes, and I guess Michelle made a comment that our ordinance doesn't give any provision for real-time monitoring.
Excuse me, doesn't what?
Have a provision for the real-time monitoring in our ordinance. It goes by persons per bedroom.
Michelle Hoffman, State's Attorney's Office. I'm not a scientist. I don't claim to understand all the calculations that are being discussed. But from a legal standpoint, I think we need to be careful and make sure that we're following our ordinance. And my understand the ordinance is that these calculations are based upon requirements set forth in our ordinance.
So really, are you saying that we really don't have the authority to go beyond, what the ordinance says, and that is just the simple calculation? So in other words, we really don't have the authority to, accept the proposal that Mr. Johnson made? Is that what you're telling us?
That's a question in my mind. Again, I would defer to planning and zoning, but my understanding is that our ordinance has certain requirements with regard to the size of septic systems. And it's based upon number of bedrooms. There's other factors, but again, that's a question in my mind. It certainly is a question I could look at more closely, but I would be cautious about approving anything that's not allowed by our ordinance.
And I would be more comfortable if we actually knew what the numbers were in the basement prior to approving any other, like I said, because right now we don't know, we can assume that, and in some cases, we've seen the usages be okay. I think there's only one or two properties that have ever utilized that provision in the state administrative rules.
Mr. Chair.
I think Jim was actually after Kathy, and then
I am
I'll come
a little
back to you.
concerned about, we're just simply stepping outside the confines of our regulations and saying, hey, how about a little experiment here? Which would be fine if we weren't in the same circumstances that we are. So I am hesitant, even though I think this might be an effective way of determining what peak flows are and so forth. But I can't see how we can treat one particular individual in this way, and then somebody comes in next week and says, well, I'm undersized. Yeah, you are, but we're gonna figure out if maybe Mr. Johnson's situation is typical of most situations, and maybe we'll change the law in the meantime, at some point. This to me is poor policy, quite frankly, even though I think there's virtue in what he's suggesting. But I think we have to have some kind of realistic legal mechanism to employ this kind of experiment, which is what it is. And the reason I think we obviously use standards is they're a simpler way of applying a standard of usage. And if everybody had meters on their, if that was mandated somehow at the very beginning, that would be a different story. But I'm hesitant. Michelle's statement, I think, strikes the very heart of my concerns, which is I just don't think you can suddenly step outside the ordinance and say, oh, yeah, we're going to do. And I think others would say, well, why didn't I get that opportunity? Or, those kinds of things begin to pop up. So that's my concern, even though it would be, to me, ideal to have meters on all of these units and so forth, so that we had accurate and in real time reporting, perhaps remote reporting on what water usage was. We could make much more. But if we go around and say, okay, you got to have a meter on this now before you put your septic system in. You got to have a meter so we know how much water you're going to be using. People might be upset about that too. So, okay.
You just raised a very good point. I believe there was a VHR issue the last Planning Commission meeting, and I'm sorry, Michelle Hoffman, State's Attorney's Office. And we anticipate suggesting a few amendments to the VHR ordinance if the Planning Commission likes the idea of possible real-time monitoring of these flows. That's something that could be addressed within the amendment to the VHR ordinance moving forward.
Yeah. That's what I would be comfortable with that. But
Oh, and typically when we see the meter data, it's usually from people that have community systems. That's usually where we've seen it, like Rapid Valley Sanitary District, like in the Green Valley area. They are still on septic systems, but they have metered water and it's been metered over a long period of time. So that information is readily available and it isn't like an after the fact information. Once the situation comes up, it's usually, on a community water system where we utilize that data so that they have other uses that are allowed. You guys have seen other conditional use permits in the Green Valley area where we have used meter data to verify that the septic is sized appropriately.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Brittany, I understand not everything's black and white, and there's areas that are gray, and I always use that common sense. That's how I run. But with that being said, I realize that there's state statutes that we have to abide by. With that being said, why can't your department or the state's attorney's office explain to the state this particular situation? And maybe Dan could go to the state level because they have the authority to do what we probably don't. Explain the situation. The bottom line is that we're trying to protect the water quality and promote commerce. So one size don't fit all in this particular situation, and I would like to see it go to the state and let them make the final decision.
In my experience with the state too, on some instances, when it's along an impaired water body, they are less likely to grant variances. And I don't know if that would be the case in this, just be caution of that because they do typically try to protect that resource first. So they don't bend necessarily sometimes on their rules when there's an impaired water body, especially when the impaired water body and the rule that you're asking to bend or correlate like E. coli.
I don't know we're trying to bend anything. I think we're just trying to mend something that doesn't seem to be working too well.
Right. In the administrative rules, we all know that they're outdated, and we've tried to work with the state. We've had another commission chair several years ago even go to the state and ask to have some of those rules changed because they're somewhat archaic, and we're still here. So, I mean, we agree. We've had other, Board of Commissioners that have agreed and actually gone to the state and asked, and it's still, there's very little change or very little movement in changing of those administrative rules.
Mr. Chair,
Jim?
not to, emphasize this too much, but, I mean, we are talking about a water quality area in the most sensitive area in the state. And it's an area which geologically does not lend itself to the disposal and dispersion of waste oftentimes. And so I think we have to be particularly sensitive. And I'm sure Mr. Johnson, the very attraction of his specialty resort depends on good quality, environmental quality. And so I would, once again, I'm simply trying to emphasize, I think it's just important to move slowly here and to tread very carefully with making sort of quick and I think unstructured judgments about how we should approach something that we have an established standard. And I think if anything, we need to spend some time looking at this standard. And I certainly, as I said, I'm not opposed to entertaining this notion if there's some way to measure clearly water flow over time. But I just want to emphasize the importance, I think, of water quality in the Black Hills and as an asset and, for the state and for everybody who lives there.
Mr. Johnson, I have some questions. If you would come back up, please, sir.
Yes, Chairman.
Have you reviewed what it would take for you to add the additional square footage to the mound system to stay within the codes?
Therein lies the problem because, like Brittany said, I'm just a little over 100 feet from Spring Creek, and that's the minimum, 100 feet in South Dakota. I already had to get a variance from the Forest Service to be able to bring the edge of the mound system right to my boundary with Forest Service. So I'm pretty much maxed out on how much mound drainage system I could do. I just, it actually has a little bit more capacity than the 480 gallons, but just given the limitations of the lot and the boundary with Forest Service and the distance of Spring Creek, I'm pretty much at maximum size right now. I guess I would like, just while I have the floor again, right now, if there's 6 people downstairs in this vacation rental, that's the only 6 people in. And the South Dakota state law, if you look at where this table 2 comes from, it has a provision in there for metering the water systems. It has a formula, and it's all about coming up with average use per person. So it doesn't matter whether there's anybody upstairs or not. It meters the entire water system, and what you're coming up with an average, like you alluded to, Ms. Johnson, that if I had 6 people downstairs and I find out what the average use over a summer of that volume, it's just a matter of the ratio of, 6 to 8 based on that water use. So you don't have to have anybody upstairs. And it's not like I'm putting, the maximum on this property will always be 8 people. If I have 6 downstairs, I would never rent more than 2 people upstairs. And I can control that very carefully. So I'm confident I'm not going to compromise the water quality of Spring Creek with this. And I would just ask that the committee consider basing these things not on, by her own admission, kind of archaic data from 1996 to what's modern and it wouldn't exactly be real time, but you could do it week to week to week, and it would be much better data than what you're going on right now. And if I'm willing to assume the cost of providing that data, that's better than the way you're doing it right now. Any other questions?
No, that answers my question, and I guess I would just extend on what Jim's saying. I think the concern is that we move forward without having that background or that history of data that supports moving outside or away from the ordinance per se. So I would emphasize that we should move slow as well. So if I understand this right, your proposal is that you would remain at the 6 in the rental.
Correct.
You would then gather data over a certain period of time.
All summer long.
And then you would come back and request from the commission by saying, here's my data, and I'm below the standard, the gallons per day, et cetera, can I now move to 8? Is that a summary of your plan?
It is, but if you look at the state law as it exists right now, it has very specific guidelines for the formula based on the average use. Then there's a multiplier. It gets multiplied by 1.5. That's the safety factor against peak flow that you wouldn't exceed. There's a big buffer in the formula in existing state law. This is not new ground. It's in the state law. So I think there's lots of safety built into the way it is right now. And I wouldn't do anything different this season. I would gather the data so I can prove my point that if I did go to 8 people, that it would be safe. And if the data doesn't show that, then let the chips fall where they may be. But I'm really quite confident it'll be within the safe parameters.
And it's not something where, I guess if you had to report on that data on a weekly basis or something like that, how would you do that? How would you propose that to
see,
happen?
with vacation rental by owner, I have a local manager. It would be easy. And these water meters are just like I use at home on rural water. I mean, you can't tamper with them. It meters every gallon. And so I could have the local manager, when she goes to clean between guests, she could read it out every week. It'd be easy to do and keep a graph. She could take a picture of it, however you want to do it. So it can't be tampered with. And it would be faithful data, trustworthy data.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Kathy.
could I just ask for one clarification based on what you asked? So, in other words, what you're suggesting is that the item in front of us is to approve that so that you can use both units as vacation home rentals.
Eventually, that was one of the CUPs.
So what you're suggesting is that you would, somehow or another, this item would be deferred for a while until you had real data to show. And then at that time, we'd use that data to determine whether the approval should be made or not.
And it wouldn't be me. I would consult with a septic system specialist, this Eugene Solseth, that has done this apparently quite a lot. So it's done professionally and independently. I wouldn't be involved. And I very carefully tracked how many people are there. I have Excel spreadsheets that come out from the software that we use for the reservation control
Right.
on this.
But so in terms of this item, I think it's item 11 really, where we would approve this, you're saying that you will put that take that off the table for the time being until you come back to us with a summer worth of data.
I'd be happy to do that.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, sir.
Dan, can I ask you one question real quick?
Yes.
There's some correspondence here between you and the state of South Dakota,
Yes, three times.
and you've been working with a gentleman. His title is engineering manager, Kent Woodsbury.
Kent Woodmansey's the head of the engineering department there.
Would this be something that if we decide to go forwards with this, that we'd want to get him involved so that?
Well, his department was the one that suggested doing this. It was the state engineer that said would be the way to do
You
it.
got a copy of that state formula that you're with the 1.5 multiplier? Is that something that we got? And
You can pull up, it's state statute.
yeah, it'd be nice to have that today. But
It's the part of the law that's attached to this table too. It's the lead paragraph.
Michelle Hoffman, State's Attorney's Office. I would simply like to point out that Section 319 of our zoning ordinance concerning vacation home rentals specifically states that wastewater systems must comply with Section 204J. So I believe even with the additional information with a real-time metering, what you're proposing would actually require a variance from the ordinance itself, not just mere approval by the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Brittany.
Sure. Mr. Chair, I just want a point of clarification. Under 74530120, it says wastewater flow capacity requirements of residential and non-residential establishments. The second sentence says, for existing facilities where the average daily flow is measured, the anticipated maximum daily wastewater flow shall be assumed to be 150% of the average daily flow as the basis for the design of the system. I think the intent of this is where it was in a community system, not to go back to try to make the system smaller. That's my understanding and the intent of reading that in the administrative rules.
Okay,
Because typically when we have taken that information, it's been from systems that are on a community or municipal type system. So they have lots of historical information.
Brittany, if I had one more question. So item 8 is the recommendation from staff is to continue this item to address basically the inadequate sizing of the wastewater treatment system, and that's being discussed. My question is, if we approve this item, and is this item just set up for 6 people right now? Item 8, it looks like item 11 is the multifamily unit, right?
One of them is the multifamily unit, and one of them is to have the upper level as the second BHR specialty resort. As it stands right now, even as the multifamily, if you look at the multifamily, it still doesn't meet the sizing requirements, and having the vacation home rental and the residence on the top still doesn't meet it, the sizing requirements. That's why they're both continued to address the sizing of the on-site wastewater system.
But if he sleeps 6 people in the bottom only, he gets to 450 and the system is sized for 450 or no?
Right, but that's assuming that the top is not used at all.
Which is what he's proposing today.
Right, and how do we as staff verify that? That's the difficult part for us when we look at making these recommendations. So
So it would be, so currently he's not able to rent it out?
currently he is renting it out. He does have approval from the Board of Commissioners to rent the bottom as a vacation home rental.
For 6 people only?
They didn't specify the number of people. They just said to use it as a vacation home rental. if I remember correctly in the motion.
But, I mean, that being said, we don't really have a way to, when we approve vacation home rentals for, let's say, 8 or 10 people, and they can only stay so many people per night, we don't have a great way of saying they didn't have 14 or 15 people there, right?
Correct. We just go based on how they advertise their system.
The Department of Health requires that we keep that data. We have to know how many people are there every night and who the person is who's responsible for everybody else. So we have that data all the time.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
Brittany, on all the information that I've been looking at, I see two numbers and I'm confused, 75 gallons and 60 gallons per day
Okay.
per person. So what's the discrepancy in the 15 gallons?
Well, that's the confusing part of this whole situation. When we originally received a building permit and in our office for this structure, it was for a single-family residence. So as a single-family residence, that is 60 gallons per person per day, and then that's assuming 2 people per bedroom. So then a conditional use permit request application was submitted to our office for this structure to be utilized as a vacation home rental. When we went out to do the site visit for the vacation home rental, it was discovered by staff that the bottom basement was also had living quarters, a separate kitchen and living area. So once that,
That was in the blueprints that I submitted, so it wasn't a big surprise. It was there,
They appear to be surprised.
Yeah,
but they didn't look at the blueprints carefully then.
continue on, Brittany.
actually we did, and it stated that if you were going to do that, you were going to come to staff and amend the building permit, which wasn't done prior. So when we went out there, so then he had to re-advertise it as a multifamily dwelling. So our dilemma here is it a multifamily dwelling or is it a specialty resort? Because we have both. And by definition, in our ordinance, the structure would be a multifamily dwelling. And if you do look at Table 2, the multifamily dwelling is the 75 gallons per person per day. So as a specialty resort, it's the 60. So, that's where there's just a lot of confusion because with this property, so then it was a multifamily dwelling, and then he came back again and submitted another conditional use permit to utilize the top portion of it as a vacation home rental also. So the original intent from our office, the original submission of the building permit was for a single-family residence. The septic system was approved for a single-family residence, the initial approval letter, correct? Yes.
Okay.
I might ask Dan one more. Dan, what is your long-term? I've heard 3 uses today, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what do you want to do with this property in the future?
So I reside in Yankton. I have no plans on leaving Yankton. This is a vacation home. I have it because I grew up in the Black Hills, graduated from school in Edgemont. I have the downstairs set up so I could rent it to try to help pay some of the maintenance costs, some of the property tax, the insurance. It's a beautiful property. People love to come and vacation there. And it's a way of making it more affordable. And I'm just trying to be able to use the property in a way that I can share it with others and make it so it's not such an expensive thing to have another vacation, have a vacation home here.
So both levels would be vacation.
Well, so again, right now, this has opened such a can of worms. I thought maybe a few weeks of the summer I would, rent the upstairs also. At this point, I'd be happy to say, well, I'm not going to do that and just keep it downstairs because that's where I have it set up so that my stuff isn't down there. It's for people that rent. I don't have to worry about them taking my stuff. So I'd be happy just to leave that as the rental area. And if I want to use the whole house, I just block out that time so that
Sure.
nobody else can be there.
I think the dilemma planning and zoning is going through is they're just trying to figure out what use he really wants. So until we get that definite use, it's hard to.
It's never going to have somebody out
Establish
there all the
parameters.
time at this point.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead,
Can I
Kathy.
ask Brittany one more question? So following up on the a question of the two numbers, the 60 and the 75. So the calculation you have for us, this is page 8 of 8, where you use the 75 gallons per day. I mean, so do I understand this right, that if indeed at the time, let's just say for, for whatever circumstances, it was approved that this was had two levels, each was a separate unit, and they were vacation home rentals in both levels. So would that number then in your calculation just automatically go from 75 to 60?
Well, it would depend on, like you said, how he's using it. The crux,
Oh, but I'm saying if it was being used as vacation home rental on both levels, would it just then automatically
it would be
switch
the
from the
60.
75 to the 60?
Correct, but the problem is he has a conditional use permit as a multifamily dwelling. So which one do we use? Typically, you would use the one that's the stricter standard because that would be your peak flows. The kind of the crux of the problem is he's advertising that basement to sleep 6 people, and he's rented it with that intent. If it was 4 and 4, we probably wouldn't be here. But the fact that he's advertised it for 6 people in the basement and he's rented it for most of this summer and last summer with that intent, that's where we're really getting into the problem
But if I
with the
may,
calculations.
my recollection, because I think I just started my time here on the planning commission when this issue came up that it needed to be, both levels needed to be separated. It had to be double or, what's the term, dual family or
Multifamily.
multifamily. Because my impression, my recollection in the conversation is that that was a required step to go through to get the 2 units approved for vacation home rentals. You had to go through that intermediate step of making it multifamily.
No, it was because of how the structure is, because it's 2 separate units, they have 2 separate driveways, 2 separate entrances. By our ordinance definition, he needed a conditional use permit because it was a multifamily dwelling. It has a locked door that goes from the top
Right,
to the bottom,
but
so they're
then
completely separate.
That had to be that had to be the intermediate so that both of those units then could be separate vacation home rentals.
No, from the staff report prior, if you read under our vacation home rental, it says unit. So technically, we have never approved 2 units of a vacation home rental. The state doesn't even look at them that way. They look at it as a specialty resort because they're 2 separate units. So that's why when we ran it as a specialty resort because our ordinance only says a dwelling unit, like the intent of the vacation home rentals was for single-family residence to be used as a vacation home rental, not a multifamily residence to have multiple rental units, because then you get into the specialty resort, bed and breakfast type facilities. So that's where, like I said, a lot of the confusion lies, and the other is that the basement is being rented for 6 people with 2 bedrooms. So when it was originally approved, there was the assumption that 8 people would be in the structure. Well, now we have 6 in the basement. And now
And there will never be more than 2 upstairs. It'll never be more than 8
Why
in the
doesn't he just
structure.
change his advertising?
well, it's already been rented for the summer, a majority of the summer for 6
And
people.
it's rare that it's 6 adults. I mean, last year there were 15 nights where there were 6 people in there. And usually the 6 is 2 or 3 children sleeping
Well,
on.
either way, we are not going to solve this issue this morning, so we need to
I apologize
come
for
up with a
taking so much
motion
time.
that we can press ahead with the agenda, would be my suggestion.
Well, thanks for your consideration.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
So, PJ, if I'm reading this correct, he is allowed, that system is designed for eight persons, is that correct? For the total structure?
I'd rather not try to guess what she's saying. I mean, to
The
me, I'm
system
looking,
is designed for 8 people or 480 gallons per day.
So then if he proposed a use that would not exceed 8 people, no matter what that's classified, would that be a step that we could try to follow?
It
As long as
could,
there's-
but the issue is, like I said, he's already advertised that basement for 6 people. He's rented it for the majority of the summer already with that intent. We don't think of children or adults differently. It's people. We don't differentiate between whether it's a child or an adult, because you still have to wash their clothes, they still sleep in the bedding, they still use the facilities, shower, things like that. So it's, you know, that isn't a differentiation as far as
And
people.
I would caution the planning commission because we can't really work off of what they say they're going to do. They're not always going to be the owners as well. That's why we have ordinances, that's why we have the numbers. If we go off of what landowners say they're going to do, that's what causes the problems right now in the county.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Sonny.
we have these number 8 and number 11. What's going on here? Are we trying to do one or the other? Can you tell us, PJ, what the difference is between 8 and 11?
Well, I believe if we're going in sequence, number 8 is the one we're talking about, but I think we also skipped over into 11.
Right, we're not talking about 11. I'm just
Right,
wondering
so-
because I'm looking at it and it seems to be a separate type of thing.
Yep. So if you look at number 8, that's about the multifamily dwelling. And 11 is about the multifamily dwelling with the 2 units, Unit 1 and Unit 2, specialty resort / vacation home rental.
So is the idea that if 8 was approved, then 11 could also be approved? I'm still confused here.
I don't know if that's the intent.
Or is it just one or the other?
Staff would recommend right now neither be approved.
Well,
Right, because
if,
as
big
it stands
if.
right now, how it's being advertised in the basement and the number of bedrooms upstairs is undersized for either use, whether it be the multifamily dwelling or the specialty resort.
So the way I'm looking at number 8 is it's wanting to use the upper level as a multifamily dwelling, but number,
No, it's
No?
the upper level as a vacation home rental specialty resort, because it has 2 separate units that he could rent out. Currently, he has stated that his personal items are in the upper level, and they're just using it for personal use.
Trying to exceed the use of what the carrying capacity of that property is. So unless the septic system is increased in size, the uses that are proposed are not suited for that property.
I understand all that. I'm just reading in number 8, the general description says that the applicant's applying to allow a 4-bedroom residence to be used as a multifamily dwelling. Are we talking about the upper floor only? The whole thing?
The whole structure, the top and the bottom levels.
Aren't there just 4 bedrooms on one or the
No,
other?
there's 2 bedrooms in the lower level and 2 bedrooms in the upper level.
Oh, I see, okay.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Kathy.
I'd like to consider slightly modifying the recommendation so that we indeed are going to continue these, both 8 and 11, until such time that the problem is solved, not necessarily specify that the problem will be solved by, correcting the inadequate sizing. I mean, for example, maybe this isn't quite right, but it seems like one way to solve the problem would be to get rid of one of the bedrooms upstairs. Your upstairs would only have 1 bedroom, and then it would only be 8 people, every 6 plus 2. And so, I don't know if that's possible or not, but it seems to me there may be other ways of solving the problem. And, but I don't think that, I'm not as much as I would like to be able to be creative up here, and I'm mindful that we have to abide by the ordinances. We're not going to solve the problem up here today, like Sandy was saying. So, but just to modify the recommendation so that we're not specifying the solution to the problem.
If that were the case, all he has to do is take out a closet.
Lock the closet.
Go ahead, Brittany.
Sorry, as far as the bedroom, actually, our ordinance says it's a room that's reasonable isolation for sleeping. So if it has a window and things, the closet.
It used to be at one
Yeah,
point that
no.
we had.
Sorry.
There are never more than 8 people in this whole thing.
I know, but
And that's the capacity
I
of
know.
the septic system. I don't put extra people upstairs. And again, if they would just let me meter this thing, I can prove it. And
Sure you
it
can.
seems like that's a logical thing to do.
Thank you.
Do we
Any
have a
other
motion?
questions? The recommendation is to continue this item until such time the applicant addresses the inadequate sizing of the on-site wastewater treatment system. Is there a motion?
I so move.
you move with the
And
recommendation?
then his addressing of it may simply be some other resolution. It doesn't, that planning is,
Right, and
staff is happy with.
I'll
Yeah.
second that, because indeed, if there, I mean, the way this is, now that I think about it a little bit, is that they could address it in other ways than just simply resize the septic, so.
Motion and a second. Is there further discussion?
So if we make this motion today, then he will still be allowed to do the vacation rental in the bottom.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yes.
As of right now, he was approved by the board. Like I said, our crux to it is that he's advertising it for 6 people. So technically, it's undersized the way that it is right now. So we couldn't make that say for certain, because according to our ordinance, the septic is undersized.
If he only does 6 people in the basement, that's 450
And doesn't
gallons.
utilize the upper level, then he would meet.
I just don't want to see a business shut down
Sure,
this
no,
late in
and
the
I
game.
and I understand that, but he wouldn't be able to use the upstairs as any kind of vacation.
I don't have a problem continuing it as long as he can at least run his business and stay in, within the limits of what is permitted by the county. But I don't want to have to see that
Right.
business shut down because of a septic system issue.
Right, and I think the original intent, or our understanding was that there would be 4 people in the basement and 4 people upstairs. So when it was advertised for 6, that's kind of where it got
Sure.
thrown off.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. That brings us to item 11. Which is along the same topic.
I think it is the same topic. I mean, I put this forward as doing it as a specialty resort because that's what the state of South Dakota told me I needed to do. The Department of Health said that this isn't 2 VRBOs. This now becomes a specialty resort and it's got all the same things. You know, when I submitted the original plan for the utilization of the lower level, it showed occupancy of 6 people. I didn't like pull that out of my hat and just introduce it. It has 2 bedrooms, but I have an inflatable mattress that usually children are put on. So it has capacity to have 6 people. And that's the way I proposed it when I made my original plan for the VRBO. At this point, I mean, I'm happy to not use the upstairs, but I have many, many families coming this summer hoping to stay there. There's probably only 1 or 2 parties that are 6 people. It's usually less than that. But if you, I mean, I'll be happy if you just let me not have to tell all those people they can't come. And I mean, should I, you want me to meter the water just to, as a study, or do I need to not even mess with that?
At this point, sir, that would be your option to do that, but know that the regulations and the ordinances would have to be changed in order to accept that information from my understanding of what the state's attorney said. So just because you provided that data doesn't necessarily mean that that we'd be able to approve something outside of the ordinance.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Any other questions on item 11? Seeing none, the staff is recommending to continue this item until such time the applicant addresses the inadequate sizing of the on-site wastewater system. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Brings us to item number 12.
Good
Good morning, Cassie Bolstead, Assistant Planning Director. On item 12, there's just a couple minor corrections that staff wanted to make. Item 12 is a conditional use permit 1904 to allow for a vacation home rental on the subject property in a suburban residential district. On page 5 of 7, in the analysis section, staff just wanted to make a couple corrections to E, F, and G. Currently, E says the applicants have obtained the recent 2019 South Dakota Department of Health lodging license for the cabins, implying that there's potentially more than one cabin on this property. That is just a typo. There is only one cabin on here, so that should just read that they've obtained their lodging license for the vacation home rental. F states that the informational books were current. Again, just a typo. There's only one book. So that should state that the informational book is current, just one singular book. And then G currently states that there are cabins, plural, which should also be changed to read required fire extinguishers and smoke alarms are located on each floor of the vacation home rental. Just a couple minor typos in there, but it was kind of confusing, so staff just wanted to make those corrections. So staff is recommending approval of this conditional use permit with 14 conditions. I would like to amend condition number 1, however. This vacation home rental is within the Idlewise Mountain development. Idlewise Mountain is on a lagoon system, a community system. So they do not have to receive DENR approval for that. They have to receive approval from the homeowners association because they're on a lagoon system. So for these ones, we actually go on their sizing based on section 319F1, which states that there are 2 occupants per bedroom plus an additional 4 people. This is a 3-bedroom vacation home rental, so they'd have 6 occupants plus 4 additional, so they'd be limited to 10. So condition number 1 should state that the maximum overnight occupancy based on section 319F1 be limited to 10 people, and the maximum daytime occupancy be limited to 20 people per Pennington County zoning ordinance section 319F13.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Sandy.
I missed what you said. I was involved with the Idlewise Mountain Homeowners Association for about 12 years, and I missed what you said about it just now.
Idlewise Mountain is on a lagoon system. So they have a community lagoon system for their wastewater. So for their wastewater with a community system, they don't necessarily have to obtain approval from DENR. They have to obtain approval from the homeowners association for their vacation home rentals occupancy, because the homeowners association are the ones who monitor the lagoon system for capacity. The state does deal with lagoon systems, but the homeowners association ultimately knows what its capacity is, so they're the ones who approve it for a certain
And is the
occupancy.
homeowners association involved in this applicant?
Yes, yep.
Request.
With these ones in Idlewise, we require them to get a statement from the homeowners association saying that they approve it.
And you
to be
do
a
have
vacation
such a statement?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, sir.
Cassie, just a question. Do those homes up in Idlewise, is their water usage metered?
Okay, they're saying yes. The FARs are here, they're saying yes.
So each individual home up there is metered, and then their monthly bill, I would assume, is based on their water usage?
Yes.
Okay. That's my question.
Okay. Any further questions? Seeing none, recommendation by staff is for approval of conditional use permit 19-04 with 14 conditions, noting the corrections to under the analysis E, F, and G, and the modification to recommendation number 1. Is there any
Move for approval.
I'll
Second.
second.
motion and second? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, no. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Brings us to item 14.
Let me get that. My apologies, 1 second. Item 14 is construction permit 1904 to strip off topsoil for exploratory purposes for future development. Staff had pulled this construction permit off the consent agenda because early last week and over the late last week and over the weekend, we understood that they actually started construction prior to the approval of the construction permit. So staff is recommending to add an additional condition to the 14 that are already there, that the applicant pay the late charge per Pennington County zoning ordinance, section 511 WZ. And with that, staff would recommend approval of conditional use permit 1904 with 15 conditions.
What is the fine? Is it 100?
Double the fee. In this case, it's double.
And-
So another 250.
Thank you.
One question. Mr.
Go ahead.
So, maybe, did you say there was 15 conditions?
There will be now with that additional one.
And we're on item,
Am I looking at 12? Oh, I'm looking at 12.
I only see 11 conditions.
No, I'm sorry. You are right. I wrote my motion down on the
Oh,
wrong
okay.
item.
I'm
So,
thinking,
yeah.
oh, I missed-
So then, thank you. Staff would recommend approval of conditional use permit or construction permit 1904 with 12 conditions.
Okay,
With the
all right.
addition. Thank you for that. I
Yeah.
should have wrote it down under the right section.
All right.
I had the same question, Kathy. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Sonny.
PJ, did you say you call this a late fee?
It's called a late charge. It's section 511 is called a late charge.
A late charge when they start work prior to permitting?
On certain things, if a construction permit is needed for work and it has not been approved and you start work, then by ordinance, you pay double. There's another section in 511 that says if you do work or require like a building permit or some other things, you not only pay double, but also a $500 fine.
Okay, just
This is the
late.
lower of the two.
The word late just throws it off a little bit.
It's not worded well. I
Okay.
agree with you.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
has the applicant been notified of this?
I don't know. I was just notified of this morning. The staff that got this, it's like through drive-by, and the applicant that we are working with, we've worked with before. They're aware of how construction permits work.
Thank you, PJ.
Yep.
Any other questions? Sir, if you'd come forward and state your name.
My name is Lon Buhner. I'm actually here for a different item, but I live right near Rockerville. I just was going to make the comment that they may have started construction, but in reality, they have removed all of the topsoil. There is a huge amount of topsoil that has been removed and is sitting there. So I thought I'd let you be aware of that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, staff is recommending approval of construction permit 19-04 with the addition of the 12th condition. Are there is there a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, no. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Brings us to
16.
item 16.
Okay, Cody Sack, environmental planner. Item 16 is a construction permit review for a construction permit 1812. It's to review a construction permit to excavate and level a hillside for a future residence. This has been in front of you guys before. It was continued to from the last meeting. In the meantime, I've talked to Davis Engineering. The applicant contacted Davis Engineering. He contacted us and asked us what we were looking for, and I gave him that information, and he told me that he would come up with a plan to give to the applicant, and then to most engineers recommend or require a retainer, and he said that he would give all that information to the applicant, and if the applicant didn't want to work with him or go with that, he would contact me back and say, hey, Davis Engineering's no longer working. I haven't received any information from Davis Engineering, but I also haven't received that call that he's not working for the applicant. So that's where we're on that. One thing we wanted to show people, because we don't, we're up here telling you that a hillside's taken out, but you don't really see it. So this is what it looked like previously in 2011. So this is kind of what the hillside would have looked like. And this is what it looks like now. It's dug out pretty well. However, last week we had the the DOT erosion control sediment training. It was recommended to the applicant that he go to that, and he did. And since then, these pictures were taken today. He's working on stabilizing the site. He's redone his straw mats. When water's coming this way, you put your straw mats parallel, and that's what he's done. And he's thrown more straw out there. I talked to him this morning. I recommended that in that little area, that little gap right there, that he throws down some more straw just to get a little more cover. And if it blows away, he'll need to keep maintaining that, and he's aware of that. He's got a pile of gravel. I don't have the picture, but he's got a pile of gravel where he's going to redo his entrance there, and then it's going to go up past farther as well. And he's got straw. It's hard to see, but he's got straw up on that far side, and where he disturbed the ground down at the other approach that he took out, he has stabilized that as well, and he threw grass seed down into the ditch to start stabilizing the ditch as well, because that is disturbed, and he plans on throwing grass seed down and getting this stabilized, because he doesn't know where things are going to go with the engineered plans and when he's going to get those. So he's going to start the stabilization process to get the site stabilized and then go from there once he gets those plans.
Any questions? Cody, I have some. So are you satisfied now with the way that he has put the erosion controls down on the site?
I'm satisfied with the progress that he's made, and like I said, I talked to him this morning and told him that I would do some throw some more straw down, and he's gonna put more gravel up on top to create more of a driveway so he can drive on there and everything of that nature. So I would be satisfied. We still want the engineered plans to see what he's gonna do, and he did mention that. Sloping that hillside off as well now, and seeding it until he can figure out what to do. So to kind of bring the site back to what it was before construction began.
Okay,
Chairman?
go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, how about the road ditch? And is that cleaned out such that there's good, flow, along the road ditch downstream essentially, so it doesn't, there's no concern about if we start getting, we're entering the season of heavy rains, and is there any concern that those ditches have gotten filled so there's not the capacity to handle the water and it could overtop School Drive?
He submitted an inspection report that he did that said he dug that out. I haven't been there to witness any flow or any issues with flow. We haven't had really a lot of rain that would require flow through there, so that'd be something that we'd have to monitor. And he's still got the construction permit, so it'd be something where if that did happen, he's still responsible to fix that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
did he, as Brad, it was my understanding that he was going to hire Davis Engineering. Is that still on course?
I believe so. I haven't heard anything from, like I said, Davis Engineering said that they would get me a plan and a timeline on things would take, because obviously to do something like that, to get engineered plans for drainage isn't something you can do overnight. So I requested that he give a timeline, say, hey, we're working with Mr. Nibel. This is what we're planning on doing. This is how long it's going to take, and then go from there. I haven't received that yet, but I also haven't received any. He said that he would contact me if he wasn't working with the applicant, and I haven't got that phone call yet. But that'd be a question more for the applicant, if he's still working with Davis Engineering or not.
Can Brad come up real quick?
Please state your name.
Hi, my name is Brad Nibel. I'm the owner of the property on School Drive.
Based on the information I read, Brad, I would think that if you could get Ron, if you haven't hired him, I think a professional engineer could give you some guidance and eliminate a lot of these issues.
I've been trying to contact him. I talked to these guys at the class, what we took last week, and I haven't been able to get any call back from him. I get his voicemail, so I just assumed because of this weekend that they were maybe out of town. But I'm going to try to go up there to his residence today or tomorrow and see if I can.
When you get him engaged, could you let?
He was going to come down to meet with me, and so we could look at the site, but I haven't been able to contact him to see when when we're gonna get.
When you contact them, or if you engage the services, would you keep planning and
Sure,
zoning?
I will. I really want to get something on the retaining wall so I can find out what that's gonna cost before I move anywhere with this. That's what I talked to Cody about, is just revegetating the whole site, and until I get those engineered plans, and then decide where to go from there with that whole project.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to say to the board that this class that I took last week with these guys should have been the first step when we were having problems in December. It should have been, you have to go take this class, or you need to go take this class. We have classes out here for getting, what do I call it, to be a contractor in Rapid City. You can go out to the community college and take classes to do that. That should be offered there with them classes, so you can go out there and take that at least once a month, so that, because these guys that taught the class know everything there is to know about erosion control and how to stop the sediment from coming off the property, and it was really a great class to take. I mean, and like I told you before, I figured out the other day that I've been doing this since, like 17 years since I started with my brother, and we've never put any of this kind of stuff in. And so it was like, but the class was great. They taught you how to do it. They taught you how to do it right. They showed you where to put everything to control the water flow and stuff like that. And it should be at least available so that these guys can say, you know what, you need to go take this class. You gotta, because so we're on the same page. And as far as, I've been contacting some people about the regulations and the fines and stuff that are associated with this thing from South Dakota. I'd like to see that not adopted, because some of those fines, they can come out to your job site and give you a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 fine because your paperwork isn't done right. Even if you're doing everything else right, you still can get this huge fine. So I'm hoping that the state of South Dakota and Pennington County won't adopt those rules and Cody said at the county level, they don't have those kind of fines like that. But if you get the state permit, you can get into that, and they're huge. I mean, it's enough that it could ruin a.
That's why we try to encourage you to work with our local county officials, so you don't have to get the state involved.
Well, yeah, there again, that was simply the fact that we weren't on the same page as to what was required or what they wanted me to do, because I'd never done it before. And I don't think that, I worked with Jim Skull for 6 years, and I don't think even when I worked there that I ever saw any more than a silt fence get put up on a project. And that was on the reservation, so it was a different set of rules. But thank you guys for your patience with this project, and I hope we can get this all straightened out and reseeded back to grass.
Thank you, Brad.
Yep.
Any further questions?
Move to approve.
We have a motion for approval. Is there a
Second.
second? Wait a second. This is to be continued.
Right.
Was that the intent of your?
Right, I was going to take the recommendations of planning and zoning.
And the second as well?
Yes, I have to continue to May 13th.
Okay. We've had a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Brings us to item 17.
So again, PJ, Planning Department Director. Item 17 is minor plan unit development amendment 1902 to amend an existing plan unit development to allow for additional uses on the subject property. The applicant and agent is Voorhees Hospitality LLC, with Chuck Voorhees as the landowner and agent, and he is in the audience today if you have any questions. Subject property is 4.82 acres. Currently, the applicant is requesting to have an additional, or to add an additional fourplex structure to replace 4 of the 5 previously approved cabins. The addition of an outdoor gathering space to include a bar area, fireplace, and cooking area. And also he's looking to apply for a beer and wine license. These specific requests were not part of the plan unit development, which is why this amendment is taking place at this time. This was originally approved back in 2004 by the Board of Commissioners for the rental of some existing cabins with 11 conditions. It was amended again in 2009 to allow for an RV park, tent camping sites, and to reduce some of the setbacks along the property lines. And that was with 16 conditions. It was amended again in 2015 to request 5 new cabins, a new residence, a new garage, and a low-water bridge and a central pavilion be established on the property. So what the applicant is looking to do now is replace some of those previously 5 approved cabins, replace 4 of those with the fourplex. Also with the, he's looking to remove this lean-to and add this type of gathering pavilion, which would have the bar area, the fireplace, and also kind of an outdoor kitchen. This was routed through an interdepartmental review. The county on-site wastewater specialist would just like to have a talk with Mr. Voorhees about the capacity that he's proposing for the fourplexes, just to make sure that the current on-site wastewater treatment system still complies with that, and also because it's a commercial structure, the state would have to be involved as well. So it's more of just a checks and balances, not that they necessarily see an issue, just making sure that there isn't an issue. It was also routed to the environmental planning supervisor, who just wanted to comment that there is special flood hazard area on the property, so any work in that area requires a floodplain development permit. This request specifically falls outside of that area, so a floodplain development permit would not be required for this. Right now, in the staff report, staff has a recommendation of approval with 25 conditions. However, staff would like to add an additional condition, which reads as follows: that the planning director may allow additional development or construction which is consistent with the existing development on this property. Significant changes in the use or impacts of the adjacent land uses as determined by the planning director shall require an amendment to this plan unit development. This is a condition that we normally place in plan unit developments to allow the landowners a little bit more flexibility, but it does not eliminate the need to come in for minor or major amendments with plan unit development. So since it wasn't in there, I wanted to add it. I did talk with the applicant about this, and he was okay with that. So that would make 26 conditions. So with that, staff would recommend approval of minor plan unit development amendment 1902 with 26 conditions.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I'm familiar with the property, and I went out there when he was removing the former structure, and I can just say that Chuck's a good steward to the land, and everything that I see out there has always been first class, and based on my casual observation, I certainly wouldn't have any concerns with approving this.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, recommendation is for approval of item 17, PU 19-02 with 26 conditions, the 25 written and the one stated by PJ. Is there a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Brings us to item 18.
Good morning, Brittany Molitor again. Item 18 is layout plat LPL 1907 to reconfigure lot lines to create Lot 1 and Lot 2 of Hensley Place. Currently, as it stands now, these properties are zoned General Agriculture District and General Agriculture District. There are three separate lots in this proposed configuration. One is 0.76 acres, one is 1.74 acres, and one is 0.48 acres. 2 of the properties are currently vacant. One does have a single-family residence. Staff did route this through the interdepartmental review for comment. There were some comments that came back from the highway department. The comment was that the existing approach must be used for Lot 1 or an approach permit obtained. Access for Lot 2 shall use the existing driveway across Lot 1 with a platted easement or approach permit obtained. In addition, this was routed to the Register of Deeds. The Register of Deeds had some comments as that the current legal descriptions are not correct on the property. So in the formally of the plat, she would like the correct legal descriptions. That is going to be part of a condition of approval. Staff did go out on the site and do a site visit. There is a considerable amount of debris, burned buildings, things like that on the subject property. So there is some ordinance 106 violations. There was a letter that was sent to the property owners last week from our ordinance enforcement officer. In addition to some of that other material on the property, there are outhouses that would need to be reviewed. But for the purposes of the layout plat, staff finds no significant issues with the applicant's request to reconfigure the lot lines because they are decreasing density. It will require a lot size variance or rezone of the property prior to the plat being submitted to the Register of Deeds. However, the property must be brought into compliance with Ordinance 106 prior to moving forward with the plat, i.e. a minor preliminary plat, rezone, conditional use, or variance process. There are some existing outbuildings on this property, on one of the properties that would require a conditional use permit because it is an accessory structure, excuse me. So staff is recommending approval of layout plat LPL 1905 with 15 conditions.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner, go ahead.
Brittany 106, I'm learning, but that's just kind of a visual nuisance to the neighbors with the clutter.
Ordinance 106 has to do with nuisances. It has to do with junk material, debris, things like that. Some of that stuff is grandfathered in general agriculture districts when it is actually taxed general ag, which this one is zone general ag, but it's not taxed general ag because it doesn't meet the minimum lot size requirements. And in order to actually rezone it to a suburban residential district, it would have to be in compliance.
Are those two lots going to be large enough to accommodate on-site septics?
Pardon? There is an on-site wastewater system on one of the lots already, but yes, they will be over the acre.
I'm in favor of this, but I'd just certainly like to see some of that clutter removed, and I think this is an opportunity to make that happen.
Brittany, I have a general question. The preliminary layout plat that was submitted looks somewhat like a hand sketch. Are there any things that you guys review on these preliminary layout plats where you need more detail in order to make sure that all the i's are being dotted and t's being crossed?
That is part of it, submitting it to the Register of Deeds. She did come back with some comments on the formally. For the minor plat, one of the conditions that it would have to be done by a registered professional surveyor. So once that's done in the minor plat process, we'll address some of those concerns.
And the applicant's fully aware of all of this and okay with that?
Yes, it is as part of the recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of layout plat 19-05. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Brings us to item 19, the rezone of,
Yeah, I do too.
How about a 5-minute break
Yeah.
before we begin 19?
I'm okay with that. Need a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We will be taking a 5-minute break. Let's reconvene and let's just make it 10:45. So you got 7 minutes.
Thank you.
It's 10:45, so we'll go ahead and bring the meeting back to order. I'm assuming, do I need a motion to reconvene?
If you do move to reconvene.
Second.
A motion and a second to reconvene the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. We're reconvened. So we pick up with item 19, the rezone and comprehensive plan amendment 19-02. Go ahead, Brittany.
Item 19 is rezone 1902 and comprehensive plan CA 1902 to rezone 19.419 acres from general agriculture district to highway service district for proposed lot 1, and to rezone 1.953 acres from general agriculture district to highway service district. This was in front of you at the last commission meeting, or planning commission meeting, and it was continued to this meeting till the applicant could be present. Do you guys want me to go through all of the request, or do you want to kind of start where?
I don't think that we necessarily need to go through all of the requests, but I will look at the board here. I'm getting
Okay.
some head shakes.
Yeah, and actually, I missed last time, but I listened to the video, so to try to come up to speed, so I'm all right with kind of picking up where you left off last time.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
Are there any immediate questions for staff from the board? No? Are there any people in the audience that would like to speak on this issue? And I guess I would start with the applicant. They weren't available at the last meeting, and so if there's anything that the applicant would like to discuss first, let's start there. Please state your name, sir, when you get to the podium.
Ken Nash, I'm the agent for Dwayne Pancratz on this property. He asked me to try and sell this property last spring.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Dwayne asked me to try and sell this property and plat it off so that we could plat the billboards property off away from that bigger piece and then sell the larger piece off. So we've been through about 17 meetings so far, along with other meetings between staff and the neighbors and commissioners also to try and get this resolved. If there are any other questions, I don't know what to answer at this point, other than we have a DOT access permit for the access off of Highway 16. We have another easement for a secondary access through the motel next to this property, if it's needed. And then we have an emergency access in the northwest corner of that property also. I don't know of any other issues that need to be addressed, but if there are some, I'll sure do it.
Did I hear you correctly? You do have a DOT permit for that platted access to the property off of the highway?
Yes.
Okay. Has staff seen that DOT permit? Okay.
Would you?
Oh, sorry. No, I have not, but I have not been in the office for the past couple of days, so I apologize. Okay. Jerry's going to make some copies. For
I just know that there were a lot of questions regarding the permit at the last meeting, and so if there was something that could be taken a look at, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
I don't have any questions from the.
Mr. Chair, is that permit
Go ahead, sir.
approved, or is it just?
I'm sorry?
Is that permit actually approved?
Yes.
now? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, so to understand it correctly, you do in fact have access off of the supplemental access point off of Highway 16.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Any further questions?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, sir.
it was brought to my attention that there, as Ken mentioned, there is another source of access pending, if need be, and that would be through the adjacent property to the west, which is occupied by the motel, and we've all got a copy of that in our packets.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, if there's no further questions, thank you for coming up. Anybody else from the audience? Sorry, I realized you were up before, but if you would please restate your name when you come to the podium.
Which one do you need here?
While she's pulling that up, my name is Lon Buhner. Excuse me. I did meet with state DOT in discussing the traffic issues, and my understanding was that they do have an access that has been approved, but that was for ag purposes only, and if they were going to change the use of that, they were likely going to have to come back, and I think that's why the staff had put in the packet, the information they were going to have to provide for DOT to then take a look at that access. So there is an existing access, but has been designated for ag uses, which they use to get into their signs in that ag property.
Okay.
I would like to take a few minutes to discuss the development in the area as it pertains to the subject property. Again, the subject property is currently zoned ag, You can see that there's a median caused by the split of Highway 16. There's a lot of residential property to the north, to the south, to the east. And I'd like to talk about, first off, on the north end. In Mr. Popple's letter, he said that the subject property borders Baker Timber to the east, with Baker Timber being a commercial property, and that was justification for this to be considered commercial or highway service. It does border it to the east. However, if you take a look just north of that subject property, you have our development area that also borders Baker Timber. And in fact, 3 of those 4 lots have been developed with nice single-family residences. Mr. Popple also indicated that the property was bordered on the west side by the motel, which was a commercial property, and I agree with that. However, it also borders in a larger length our subdivision with residential lots that again have been developed. The subject property also borders all residential single-family homes to the north. I'd like to start at the south end of Highway 16 there, and you can see kind of that purple area which is zoned highway service. That area consists of 4 lots. 3 of those 4 lots have single-family residences that have already been established on those lots. The current assessed value of just those single-family residents on those 3 lots is over $1 million. So while you look at this plat and you think, well, here's highway service, in reality, that is a residential area. You see that when you drive through South Rockerville Road. There is one small piece, that triangle just south of Highway 16 and west of South Rockerville Road. That is an undeveloped lot. It's about 1 3/4 acres. So I'll talk briefly about that here in a minute. If you look at that section just to the west of South Rockerville Road, there's a small sliver there that's highway service. In reality, that is National Forest Service land, and I'll show you on the MPO map. So that is not available for highway service. So what you have left is you have the highway service that's really in the median between the two. Highway 16 is going north and Highway 16 is going south. And again, the map can be a little misleading because in reality, in that median area, you do have 2 businesses. You have the Gaslight Restaurant and you have the motel cabins of the Rockerville Motel. But what you also have in that median are 4 single-family residences. Now, they're old and they were built many, many decades ago, but they're occupied. So when you look at that, you can't just consider that to be a highway service area because that also has a lot of residences that are associated with it. You take that area and you look at the MPO map, and I've been asked about all the red on the MPO map, but I really didn't understand what they were referring to, and I've had to kind of get up to speed with what the MPO is. What you see here is the same area to the south of Highway 16, although they take that southernmost lot and they call it public, quasi-public. I've lived here 15 years and I don't know of anything associated with public with that particular lot. There is a single-family resident building on that lot. So again, that red and that blue, in my opinion, is residential. And if you take a look at the kind of the light bluish green, they have designated all of that forest conservation. That forest conservation designation also covers all of the residential that we have in the area, including our low-density residential. And I will discuss briefly what that definition is that they're using for forest conservation. You can see that piece to the west that shows Forest Service, even though the county is calling that highway service. When you get into the median area, this MPO map has kind of taken into account the single-family residences that are there. That's why they have put those in the color of forest conservation. Every single area where there's a single-family residence, they've kind of targeted that as forest conservation versus mixed-use commercial, which is the red. When you move north of 16, you see the subject property. They do have the subject property listed as mixed-use commercial. I don't know why they have it red. I do know, based on the timing of the public, quasi-public to the south, my research tells me that that's probably a carryover from an RV park and campground that existed in the 1984 to 1986 timeframe. This was before our subdivision was zoned low-density residential. So the possibility exists that they took a look and recognized the motel was there as commercial and said, well, we've got this adjacent, so let's go ahead and call that mixed-use commercial. That's a possibility, but I think that where I would put my vote is there's one thing that is common with the subject property, the pieces that are red inside that median, as well as the red and blue that are outside south of Highway 16. And that is that every single one of those properties, either now or in the past, has been owned by a company or corporation, an LLC or an incorporated company. You can see on this map that the subject property, which is owned by the Borglum Historical Center Incorporated, is listed as mixed-use commercial, but yet the small piece that is zoned commercial in the median, owned by Dwayne Pankratz, they have gone ahead and listed forest conservation. So I don't know that for a fact that that's the case, but I think that they took a look at the county records, and if they saw a company, they felt, well, okay, if there's a company that owns this, an LLC that owns this, perhaps we should take a look at mixed-use commercial. This is what the MPO says about forest conservation. They say the density should be a minimum of 3 acres per dwelling. That's identical to what we have in our subdivision with a low-density residential. They say the primary use should be open lands preserved by the city or government agencies or as part of a private development for conservation, resource protection, recreational and utility use, but they list as a secondary use large lot single-family residence. Again, to me, that's the same as low-density residential. So when you take a look at that map and you see all this forest conservation, it covers residential areas under their secondary large lot single-family residences. Mr. Popple also indicated that south of Highway 16, the highway frontage tends to, I don't want to misstate here, the highway frontage on the south lends to commercial. This is standing in the median, taking a picture to the south, and what you see is that small triangle that has been undeveloped that still remains as highway service. 1.7 acres. When you look at that, it's almost inaccessible. I would say it is inaccessible from Highway 16, and it is inaccessible from South Rockerville Road that you see on the left side of that picture. The only way that's probably going to be accessed would be an easement from the single-family residence, which sits right behind it. You can see the building on the left. That happens to be a fairly recent single-family residence that has been built. It's 4,500 plus square feet. You can see how close it is to Highway 16, but that is on highway services on your map from the county. That is on mixed-use commercial map from the MPO. So again, when you look south, it's all residential. There is no business or commercial there. I will just mention in the media and outside, there's one area where MPO has designated it to be light industrial. This is a building that the Board of Equalization is calling a storage warehouse, the same designation that they have just down the road. This happens to be the old laundromat for Rockerville, and it may be used for storage, but I think the MPO went into the county records and saw the word warehouse, and when you look at their uses, what fits a warehouse, their use is light industrial. So that's why you see light industrial in their particular map. Taking a look at the MPO map and just expanding it, you can see a shaded area toward the right-hand side. Again, that is light industrial because there was a utility building built in 1984 that is now called a storage warehouse. You can see also right in the heart of Rockerville, close to the main street, some additional light industrial, and that's because of the warehouse that I just showed you. The point I want to make here is take a look at all of that forest conservation. And what the MPO is saying, if you're going to develop it as low-density residential in essence. I don't see a commercial corridor, and the reason that I don't see a commercial corridor is I talked to you the last time I presented to you about that geologic unconformity, and I pointed out the turnout that designated that. That exact same turnout has a sign there that says, "Welcome to the Black Hills," and you see a sign that says, "Entering the Black Hills National Forest." The Black Hills National Forest boundary is right there on the right-hand side. So it makes sense for me to think that the MPO would take a look and say, you're immediately entering the National Forest. Let's try to control the development, keep the beauty, and designate this forest conservation. If you take a look at the Pennington County future land use map, this is what you see. I will say one thing, the highway service that you see south of Highway 16 that used to be 4 lots is expanded to 6 lots. And I really don't understand that because those 2 additional lots also have been developed as single-family residence. So that puts the total assessed value of the single-family residence in that southern portion of highway services at $1.4 million. With 5 of those 6 lots developed, and the only one remaining is the one that's pretty much inaccessible. I also believe that this map displays the same thing as the MPO map. It says, once you get into the Forest Service district, we'd like to see it developed as residential. In this particular instance, you have the subject property, future land use as low-density residential. And it's pretty easy to see that you have residential all the way around the subject property. The last comment I'll make is a lot of this has been set up by decisions that the county made 20 years ago. The motel was there, Baker Timber was there, but people came to the county and said, we'd like to go ahead and create this subdivision and zone it low-density residential. The county allowed us to do that, or the people to do that. In doing that and forming the road district, you can see that Pine Haven Drive, the entrance to our subdivision, makes a pretty sharp turn and catches the upper left-hand side of the subject property. I'm convinced it was done that way because the subject property, if it followed this type of plan and was low-density residential, you would have an already established access point on Pine Haven Drive on the road district. The other reason why I believe that people felt that was appropriate was the property owner of the subject property at the time, if state law was then what it is now, they had the opportunity to just opt out of being taxed as the road district by just notifying the county. There was like a 60-day period, I believe it is, for them to do that. They did not do that. They elected to participate in the road district. That decision stays with that property forever. So that's why the applicant is paying for the road district, because the decision was made with the original property owner. The last comment that I'll make is, because of where Pine Haven is and the motel, the county, probably in conjunction with the state, made sure that they were careful about an access point on Highway 16, given the on-ramps and the off-ramps and the risk associated with the traffic. And someone else is going to come up here and talk to you about the traffic concerns. But the traffic concerns of access anywhere on that subject property on Highway 16 are severe. I've spent an hour talking with the state DOT, and they have forwarded to you in a packet, or they forward to the Board of Commissioners in a packet what my concerns were, and they acknowledge that they are very valid concerns. So in summary, I encourage you to stick with your current comprehensive plan. I discussed with you last time my concerns about septic and water. I think going highway service, just like going commercial, you run the risk of a higher density there, which is going to cause us to have a higher degree of risk with regard to our water quality. By going to highway service and doing something there with access to Highway 16 is going to put the general public at risk because of the traffic concerns. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Wiener? Thank you.
Oh, my.
Well, I'm Bill Hearn, one of the neighboring property owners. I come with props. A couple of quick things here. 2 weeks ago, y'all were in receipt of a letter from Mr. Peppel, the prospective buyer of the property here. And he referenced me in that letter, and I wasn't really going to do anything about that, but he mentioned one thing that kind of deals with personal integrity, so I sort of wanted to address that issue. He indicated that I was trying to buy the property out from underneath him from the current owner, which is not true. At the Board of Commissioners meeting, I don't know, probably 6 weeks ago now, that issue was brought up, and I felt that one of the commissioners maybe thought that the current owner could take whichever offer he wanted. And I came back up to the podium and testified, and it's on the record, that, that is not the case, that I was trying to put together a buying group to offer a backup offer for the property. But Mr. Peppel indicated that, I was just trying to buy it directly from the owner, which is an absolute falsehood, so I just wanted to clarify that. I also wanted to clarify that the homeowners are not opposed at all to the rezoning to highway service of the 1.9 acre strip where the signs are. Okay, I think there might be some confusion on that. In fact, I think that's kind of an all-win situation for everybody. That doesn't impact traffic. It doesn't impact water. They're able to get the revenue off of the signs there. And also then creates a buffer if the 19 acres was zoned low-density residential, creates another 66-foot buffer between there and the highway. So I think that's actually a good plan. But I wanted to be clear that we're not opposed to that portion being zoned highway service, only the 19.5 acres. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, Mr. Buhner went through the geology with you of the area a little bit, and I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. What we have here is a very unique circumstance. And there's a reason that sign talking about the nonconformity is at the stratobowl, okay? That very dramatic change of geology from sandstone and limestone to schist is quite uncommon, okay? And particularly since it's so dramatic right there. I kind of walk back and forth right there, and you can literally find a spot where, as you straddle it, 1 foot is on limestone and 1 foot is on schist. That's how definite it is. I mean, you can see it on the ground, okay, where that shift is. And we talk about different types of rock, but a lot of times people don't have an understanding of what that really means. So I kind of want to do a quick demonstration for you. These are rocks I picked up yesterday in the area. I want to show you what happens as you deal with geology here. This first one is a piece of sandstone, okay, and all these were taken within, I don't know, 600 yards of subject property, something like that, okay? So if I take this sandstone and take water and I pour it on here, okay, you can see that that water almost totally soaks into the sandstone. There's almost no runoff on it, okay? And that's what makes sandstone so good for septic systems, because it's filtering. A lot of commercial filters you buy are really nothing more than a tube filled with sand, okay? So this it does two things. One, it holds water, and number two, it filters, and septic systems work quite well in sandstone, okay? Now, as Mr. Buhner talked 2 weeks ago, no septic system does particularly well with nitrates, okay? Even using really great soils like this, it'll only filter out about 20% of the nitrates. It does a good job on everything else, but nitrates are kind of a non-starter, okay? The other item I have here is limestone, and it's, if you're driving to Mount Rushmore and went past the Conoco station there, and where the road has been cut out on both sides, and just look at that, that's all limestone there, and you'll see the kind of holes, kind of like mini caves that are back in there. Before that being cut, those were all holes that were holding water, okay? And since it's been cut, obviously the water ran out, but this also holds water pretty good. If I pour this on here, very little, it isn't as good as the sandstone, but you can see that it absorbs that water right away, okay? And that's why limestone also produces good wells and is good for septic systems. Now, if you take the schist, okay, which as soon as you drive another 100 yards, you'll start to see this. And if I pour water on this, you see it all runs off. There's no absorption, okay? And that's why this does not work well for septic systems, and why also you get lousy wells if you drill into this, okay? There's nothing to hold any water. If you drive, you can see this with your eyes. These sit in all kinds of orientations. Originally, they were horizontal, but you'll see them up on angle. You'll see them sitting straight up like this, okay? And this schist is very close to the surface level in the area, okay? Sometimes at the surface level. You can drive through the neighborhoods and see it sticking out of the ground. As a sort of an anecdote, last fall, I transplanted 6 trees. Does this thing work? Oh, I don't know. How do you do the pointer?
Sure. Push that and I'll try it.
Okay. See, where am I here? Right here. Okay, all right. Right, that's pretty close anyway, as close as I can come here. I transplanted 6 pine trees to basically create a visual buffer between my home and the motel. And it was interesting when we did that. They were large pine trees, 8 to 10 feet tall. Okay, we used a tree spade. And the tree spade, it goes down 4.5 feet. Okay, I planted 6 trees in a space of about 80, 85 feet. Okay, 4 of those holes where we went down into it, we were still in the sand and stuff. And when you plant those trees, typically you want to put water in the bottom of the hole, fill it up about 25%. So when you put the plug in of the new tree, the water comes up and kind of surrounds the root system, okay? And that worked great for 4 of them, okay? 2 of them, though, just in that 4.5 foot depth, we penetrated into the schist, okay? And even though I brought an extra hose and we were running as much water into that hole as we as we could, we retained no water. I mean, it was just like pouring it down the gutter. I mean, the water just immediately ran out. We got no retention. And that's what happens with the schist in a septic system. So the other thing that goes on is in limestone and sandstone, anything that you put in a septic system tends to stay in the same column and go all the way down, okay? That is not true when you do it in the schist system, okay? Because as the water comes down, it'll hit a horizontal surface. It might move over a couple of 100 feet, come to a crack, drop down some more, move back the other way, okay? The water behaves and the effluent behaves much, much different in this than it does in the limestone or the sandstone, okay? So we talk about soils being unsuitable for large volumes of septic, but sometimes you don't really kind of understand what the rock really looks like and how it behaves, all right? So, if you look at EPA data and stuff, really what they say is, if you're dealing in soils that are not conducive to having good septic systems, really the only way to deal with that is to limit the input, okay? Because once you have particularly the nitrates down in the rock, there's really no remediation of that. It isn't like E. coli that you can pour a bunch of Clorox in and kind of shock that and clean that up. If you have nitrates in your well water, there's no good way to fix that, okay? In our wells in our area, we're currently running about 6 parts per million when the motel is not running, and about 8 parts per million when the motel is running, okay? Now, I'm not necessarily blaming that on the motel, but there does seem to be a correlation at this point anyway of that. So we're, at 8, we're not real far away from that 10, which is the standard for drinking water, okay? So we don't have very much margin for error there. If the subject property was, used and had a number of people on it, well, I'll put it this way. We have about 60 people in the neighborhood, okay? It wouldn't be hard to imagine a commercial property having 60 people there on site, okay? So that one property would double the amount of effluent that's going into our water areas, okay? Which is, pretty significant change and, certainly could impact our water pretty dramatically. So just wanted to bring that up again, okay? The other thing I want to address is traffic. My early training was as an industrial engineer, my undergraduate work, and industrial engineers deal with safety, okay, or that's one of the areas you deal with. And when you're designing systems or processes, what you're really trying to do is control risk factors. And kind of the rule of thumb that you use is if you're going to design something, you don't want there to be anything more than one risk factor, because as you add risk factors, the chances of an accident or harm goes up exponentially. It isn't linear, it goes up exponentially, okay? Use a simple example of a stairway that's outside, okay? There's a wall on one side and a handrail on the other. Well, most people can go up and down that stair using the handrail, and the only risk factor is that you have elevation, that if somebody falls, they fall down the stairs. That's kind of an acceptable risk, and there's only one risk factor. Now let's say that we have ice on that, okay? We have 2 risk factors. The chances of an accident go up pretty substantially. If we add a 3rd risk factor, let's say there's two-way traffic, people going up and coming down. The side on the wall doesn't have a handrail. Okay, so now we have two-way traffic, we have ice, and we have elevation. Put those 3 risk factors together, pretty good likelihood that you're going to have people fall and get hurt on the stairway. Okay, so the idea of having safe processes is to reduce the number of risk factors and control that through design. Okay, in the Keystone area here, we have that convoluted splitting of Highway 16. That was originally done to try to keep from basically killing the businesses in Keystone, as they redesign the highway. And that's why you have 6 entries and exits into little old tiny Keystone off of the highway, okay?
In Rockerville.
Or Rockerville, I'm sorry, I said Keystone. Thank you. That's why you have 6 entries and exits there. Well, it didn't work. I mean, it killed the town anyway, but that was the effort to try to do that. But in doing that, we've created a lot of dysfunctional traffic patterns, okay? And there's really 4 risk factors that deal with the Keystone or the Rockerville traffic issue, okay? One is that it's high speed. The speed limit there is 65 miles an hour. You know, for us that live out there, we know that the highway patrol and the sheriff's office patrol, starting from kind of where the convenience store there is, all the way to Reptile Gardens, probably twice a week, I would say. They're out there, you know, watching for speeders, trying to control that speed. So we have high speed. The other thing is there, because of the curves and the hillsides there, you have very short sight lines. In most of the cases, it's less than 100 yards, and it's 65 miles an hour. In most of the spots there, you're going to have about 2.5 to 2.8 seconds to identify a risk and deal with it. So that's a risk factor. A really big risk factor is that you have entry and exit from the high-speed lane, you know, which is highly unusual. You know, we're used to always using the left, so you don't expect traffic to be coming in on the other side, or people in the high-speed lane slowing down to exit, you know, maybe going from 65 to 30 to make an exit in the high-speed lane. You're not expecting that, okay? And the 4th risk factor is that for non-residents, they have lack of knowledge. They don't know that any of this is going to happen. You know, locally, we kind of realize that, but people from out of town don't have that, okay? So I want to show you a few instances here where, you know, it's pretty dramatic on the safety thing. And I don't have this in a PowerPoint, so I'm going to use this big map here. So hopefully we can get this done. If I talk like this, can you all hear me, or will it record, or what?
It won't.
I don't know the answer to that. It won't record?
Okay, I'll stand back here and do it this way. Okay. Y'all can see that, hopefully? Okay. We have several things here, and let's see, maybe, can you help me with this? The traffic deal. There you go. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I might be able to use this, make it a little bit better. You know, the subject property, you know, is this area right here. The access easement they currently have for the ag property is right there, okay? Coming off of this. So let's just talk about that one first, okay? If traffic is coming in this way, they have to slow down to make the right-hand turn to come into it, okay? What will happen here, or, you know, commonly, if you were driving and you saw a car slowing down in front of you, you have 2 choices. You either slow down, or if possible, you would move to the left-hand lane, right, to keep your speed up, okay? Well, the problem here is that as you change to the left-hand lane, you also have this exit right here, right across from it, okay? So back here, a car is turned into the high-speed lane, and now the car in front of them is slowing down to come into the exit, okay? So that creates, you know, 2 risk factors right there, okay, which increases the likelihood of an accident. Also, people exiting from this, you know, it's probably reasonable to assume that roughly half the people want to go towards the Rapid City area and half of them want to go to the Rushmore area, okay? So if you come out of this property, how do you go to Rapid City, okay? And that's, this is what I call the killer 140, okay? Because, turn around. The way that you have to do that is, this is where you would come out, okay? Or even if they use the new easement here that they have here, it'd be the same thing. You come down here, and if you use Google or Garmin or the navigation system on my Ford, okay, I say I want to go to Rapid City, this is the way it tells you to go, okay? So you would come down this, and you have to make this turn here. That's 140 degrees, all right? And because of the slope here, you can only see back about 270 feet, okay? If you stand there and watch back, you won't see a car coming until about 270 feet. And they're running, assuming they're going the speed limit, they're running 65 miles an hour. So to make this turn.
Sir, he brought a holder for you.
Ah, cool. Cool. To make this turn, you have to slow down. I've tried to do it about as fast as I can do it. And you're slowing down from 3 to 8 miles an hour, okay, to make that 140-degree turn. Okay, so you've gone from 65 miles an hour to not stopped, but close, all right? And the car that's coming behind you can't see you until he's about 2.25 seconds away, you know, roughly 270 feet or so, all right? So that creates a significant hazard. You're driving in the passing lane, you're not really expecting somebody to slow down to 10 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour to make that turn, okay? It's even worse if you have a trailer on. I have a 17-foot trailer and try to make that turn. Because it shows so short, even if you get on the very far side of the driving lane or the passing lane and try to make that turn, if you have a fairly short trailer like mine, 17 foot, you can't make it within the roadway. Your tires have to go off the shoulder on the far side to make the turn, okay? If you had a longer trailer, you know, it would even be substantially worse. You know, currently, there's not really much reason for people to make that turn. But if we put a lot of people in here and they're trying to go to Rapid City, we change that equation. And now there is a lot of traffic there, okay? It gets worse, though. If you make that turn and there's nobody coming up on to the stop sign there, you can kind of encroach on their lane a little bit on the turn, okay? But if they have pulled up to the stop sign, now you've lost that space. And what happens there when you pull up to that stop sign, you know, normally you stop kind of level with the stop sign, all right? Well, because of the way that lands there and looking over the hill, you can't quite see. So you pull your vehicle another 8 or 10 feet forward, because then you can kind of start to see over the hill a little bit. So it's actually the front of their car is right at the edge of the highway. You're not back at all. You're on the roadway or very, very close. So now if you start to make that turn and you have a trailer on, this is where it's really scary. A vehicle is pulled up there, a guy initiates the turn with a trailer, he realizes he can't complete the turn, okay? If he keeps going, he's going to pull his trailer into that vehicle that's at the stop sign. So what are his choices at that point? Okay, he can't back up, okay, and he can't go forward. So the back half of his trailer is sticking out in the passing lane of the road, okay? So cars that are coming, what are their choices? They can brake as aggressively as they can, but you don't have very far, okay? If you try to avoid an accident by coming off to the left, the slope is sufficient that you would probably roll your car. Be scary anyway. You know, logically, you'd want to try to go to the right-hand lane to avoid that. But if there happens to be a car there, you can't do that. So there are no good choices in that scenario. And that scenario absolutely will occur. So you have all four risk factors, which put the chance of an accident, up exponentially, okay? So, I mean, it isn't hard to conceive of that happening, having a car at the stop sign, making the turn with a trailer on, and having a vehicle to the right of you, okay? And if that situation comes across, there are no ways to avoid that, okay? And these are high-speed impacts, okay? They're not fender benders. That's where you're going to have a serious accident or fatality. There's already been a fatality in that area caused by the exiting to the left, okay? And that occurred right here. You can drive by and you can see the sign there, and the little memorial. A mother with two young kids was killed there, and they're out there 2 or 3 times a year sort of giving a tribute to that. But that was caused by that poor design. If you drive out there, you'll see now on the signs, they have the signs up saying Rockerville, exit, and there's big yellow signs they put up after her death that say exit left to try to highlight that, to educate people that this is an unusual situation. But, if you live there, you see a lot of near misses on this because people, you're going fast, they're not expecting to have entry and exit from the high-speed lane, okay, and they're just not used to that, and you see a lot of near misses. And, but if we add more traffic to that, it's just going to make that substantially worse. So, y'all, if that happens and there's accidents, you can say, okay, that's it. It's a DOT highway, state DOTs. You say, well, that's not our problem. That's their problem. But if the county allows that situation to occur, you're kind of part of that process of creating that liability to the danger of the citizens and stuff. And we live there, so we're concerned about that. But it's also a danger to the non-residents that come in. So that's my presentation on the traffic stuff. Any questions?
Are there any questions for Mr. Hearn? Go ahead,
I'm
Jim.
putting a sign up there saying that you can't make a left-hand turn.
You can do that if people would follow that.
This is such a dumb turn anyway.
Well, it is a difficult turn. I'll tell you, when I come down here, if I have my trailer on, I don't like to make that turn because it's hazardous, okay? So I'll continue way down to here, which is a long ways, okay, and make the turn and go back here. I'll also, point out in this area right there, from the Keystone Y to, really all the way to Rapid City, there are no other areas where there are businesses that you can't make a 90-degree turn, either left or right, and go directly into the business. This area here is the only area in that whole section that you have all this convoluted kind of stuff that you can't see. You can't just make a 90-degree turn and come in. And again, the design of this creates a lot of risk factors. I'm sure, state DOT and probably the county too regrets ever doing this, but at the time, you're trying to save Rockerville and that's what happened. But as that gets more and more traffic, it becomes more and more dangerous. And there's, been fatalities there now.
I think you're right about that, it seems like an odd and awkward way to access these businesses, which in my mind would drive the price of the land down and the attraction as a highway service location. I mean, if I were thinking about that, I'd think, I sure as hell wouldn't want to do that out there. I mean, I don't know where, farther east maybe or whatever. So oddly, I think the convoluted traffic patterns there may actually work to your advantage, because I quite frankly think that it would be difficult for anyone to be terribly attracted to constant on and off traffic at that location to promote a business, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I agree with you there, and that's part of the allure, that it's cheap, okay? Because of that, because you don't have access to both traffics. You can imagine if somebody's coming this way and you want to go to the property, how do you communicate that to them to have them find it, okay? It's a difficult thing to do, okay? So again, that's another reason that The key is you need fewer people, and the more folks you put in this, the higher the risk. And on this one here, if people make that turn, I personally don't think it's a matter of, if you're going to have a major accident. I think it'll happen quite quickly, actually. And, if you want to make your blood pressure go up, put on a little trailer and come up here and just make that turn, okay? And you see if your heartbeat doesn't go up and you're not watching your rearview mirror to see when somebody's coming, okay? You'll see that yourself really quickly.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't know how much wisdom the people who put together the current comprehensive plan, I don't know how much wisdom they had regarding all of the things about which you people have spoken. But I feel very strongly that the future land use map indicating low-density residential should certainly stay the way it is. Last meeting, we talked about, the need for change in the future and the expansion, so on and so forth. I still contend that the original use set forth in the future land or in the comprehensive plan, that remains solid and should stay as your low-density residential.
Well, I appreciate those comments. That's what we feel too, is just follow the plan that was given thoughtful consideration some time ago. If you look at what's really changed in the area, that would dictate a change. The land usage and stuff has not changed significantly since that was done. Okay, so it was a good decision then. I think it's a good decision now. I think it's the highest and best use of the property. It protects the water systems. You don't have the safety issues on this. It's kind of a better solution for everybody. We keep trying to stick a square peg in a round hole and just keep pounding on it. But in my feelings, that's where we are.
Well, I agree completely.
Oh, you're okay.
Thank you for your questions.
Sorry, just one point of clarification. The new comp plan does propose low-density residential for that entire development. But low-density residential in the new comp plan does not mean the same thing it does now. Low-density residential now is 3 acres. Low-density residential proposed is half acre.
I see.
Okay, so just want to make sure you're aware of that.
Thank you.
Any
still
other
feel it should
questions
remain
for
residential.
Mr. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Bill, so you're saying that you'd rather see 6 executive home sites on that 19 acres opposed to some type of highway service?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm just looking at this. If I'm going to build a home on that 19 acres and I want to build it to the same caliber of the existing homes in the neighboring subdivision, I'm going to probably, because the highway noise, we're talking about all this highway traffic and noise, I would want to probably build my home as far as away from that highway as I could, meaning I'd want to be basically in your backyard. There's a 30-foot setback to get away from the highway noise. And then I don't see those 6 high-end homes wanting to look at the 6 or 7 billboards that are on that property, because that would be their view. So to me, that 1,700 feet of highway frontage, to me, would be more marketable as highway service. And this is a rezone. It's not, nobody's going in there building we don't know what's going to happen. It's just a rezone. Earlier, we heard testimony that Dr. Johnson, he's got a vacation rental, and because of the proximity to Spring Creek, he was required to do a mound system. If they develop that property, and I would think that our planning and zoning department would address safety concerns, and if they didn't feel that conventional septic system would work, they'd probably require the same mound system. They might require holding tanks. And I think if it gets rezoned the highway service, those would be concerns that the planning and zoning department would probably address.
Well, let me address those a little bit. Number one, on the septic thing, even with a mound system, it doesn't deal with nitrates very well. Okay, there's no evidence that that really works very well. It's just the best that we have available. Okay, so I don't know if that will solve that problem. As far as the location of the homes and how desirable they are, under current regulations with, 3 acres per lot, you could have a maximum of 6. The way the land actually lays out, I'm guessing you would probably have 4, but that would be up to the developer, and it's quite possible you'd have 1. Okay, a person buy the thing and put the whole thing on there. As far as the proximity goes, if the 1.9 acres was rezoned to highway service, that gives a 66-foot basically buffer zone. And then, like I said, you have a 30-foot setback. So you're about 100 feet off of the road. The hillside does curve there, okay? So the hillside itself, the homes would sit lower than the road in many cases. So the hill, knocks off the sight line to the highway and some of the sound. And then, you find lots of places where that occurs and, just put up a 8-foot wooden fence to, block that off if that's of a concern for you. So I would agree with you that, the ones that border there, those lots aren't as valuable as the ones that are maybe to the north more, okay? But they're still very valuable residential lots. If you drive from Rockerville to Rapid City and kind of across the street from the convenience store there, Tom Rao has property listed there all along that. And what it says is executive home sites, okay? And that's right on the highway there. And so, clearly he thinks there's a market for those homes. If you look in the area and, get on MLS and look for 3-acre residential lots and use that as a circle and draw a circle around and see what you find. You're going to find almost nothing. The demand is for residential lots. That commercial or that property there, I think Pat Hall bought Rockerville, I think, in 1992. Okay. And until just very recently, nothing has happened with that in, 28 years? Okay, so the demand for commercial property clearly has not been very strong, and every residential lot is sold. Okay.
Well, I look at it, the market really decides what those properties eventually turn into. And if that market if the demand was higher for residential, I would have thought by now that property would be under purchase by somebody that wanted to develop residential opposed to highway service. And to me, the market will dictate, essentially the market will be the final element that dictates what that land's going to be used for. And because the property has been for sale, if it was that desirable for residential, I would have thought by now somebody would have bought that with intentions of doing home sites, but evidently the market's saying highway service because the only offer he's got is from someone that wants to do something commercially down there in the future.
I understand that. If the current arrangement, for whatever reason, didn't come to fruition and the property was for sale again by the current owner, we'd probably reinitiate our effort to purchase that and develop that into residential properties.
Now, the letter that we have here says that you gentlemen, you guys bought the 24-unit motel.
Correct.
And then you sold it. And when you sold it, what was it zoned?
It was commercial.
But that was, he's asking, why didn't you take that opportunity when you still had ownership of the property to rezone that to something other than general commercial?
Well, number one, that would have been a pretty big financial hit, which would have been a problem. But what we did is we were concerned about the usage of the property. So if you look at the restrictions and covenants that are on that property, we purchased the property, put on quite a long list of restrictive uses, so that it wouldn't turn into something that was unpalatable to us, okay, and then remarketed the property. And I think that's why you see it's a pretty quality property now because of those restrictions we put on, okay. There were some proposed uses of that would have not been compatible to the neighborhood at all, and that's why we purchased it. So you're correct that it's zoned commercial, but sort of commercial light, if you will, okay, because there's a lot of restrictions that you can't do on that property.
My last question would be, when they platted your subdivision, did they address these traffic concerns? Because
No, well, I don't know. I doubt that. And, there's a lot of things you learn. When I bought my home, I didn't understand the geology, of the schist steel and what issue that has of getting water and septic systems. We all understand it now, but we didn't understand it then. And likewise, I remember the first week I lived there and came to that stop sign, well, shoot, how the heck do I get to Rapid City? I'd never thought that through, okay? So
when you guys go to Rapid, then where do you turn off to make the turnaround?
Well, people do it different ways, okay? Some people come down and do this turn. Some drive all the way down to here. This road right here is a private road run by Pat Hall, and there's a sign that says private road. And Pat's been good enough to, on a limited basis, let us drive across that. It's not maintained at all. I mean, it's really steep. One of the neighbors pays for it himself, but he's got some equipment. He comes in and puts some gravel in there because, I mean, in 10 days, you get huge potholes. It's a mess. But at any point, Pat would certainly be within his right to close that. And then we'd all have to go this way. So we kind of cut across there because it's a little safer, and we're able to do that. Non-residents, they're not going to know about that. And I don't know what Pat would do, but if it started to get a whole lot of traffic, I could see that he'd just say, hey, I don't want this deal. I'm just going to close it off.
I did inspect it. I took pictures both from the south and north, and I did try to contact Pat to see what that arrangement was, because I know a lot of people use that. The day I looked at it, I didn't have any problems going back and forth, but I didn't, since I tried to get a hold of Pat, I haven't heard back, so I was just curious.
Yeah, but it'd be just like we've talked about, you don't zone a property based on the owner, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. I mean, that we have absolutely zero control over. He could close that this afternoon if he wanted to.
If I could just make just a couple comments.
Mr. Beener, we'll come back to you. Let's finish with questions from Mr. Hearn, and then.
I think that's all I got, Bill. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Then I'd like to make sure everyone gets a turn in the audience. So if there's others that would like to come up and speak, and then, sir, we'll come right back to you. Thank you. Any others wishing to speak on this issue? Okay. Mr. Beener, please come up.
I just would like to comment, Mr. Ross Connect, on a couple of things you said. First off, Bill, if I could add that just a second. I agree that I personally would prefer not to live right along Highway 16, but that single home residence that I showed you on the picture, that is very close to Highway 16 on the south end. Now, there are some trees there, but when you look at the proximity to Highway 16, it is very close, and that is a $712,000 assessed home. I also will tell you, in our developed subdivision, I pointed out to you those 3 lots that are adjacent to the sawmill. And the sawmill is actually on the top of the hill. It's not down by 16. And there were people that were willing to buy those lots and build nice homes adjacent to the sawmill, which to me is more of a nuisance than the Highway 16 traffic. The last comment I want to make, and in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it very brief, but there also is a very significant traffic issue with that access point that Bill didn't mention, and that is the blind on-ramp that you see on your picture coming out of Rockerville. You cannot see that on-ramp from the access point on Highway 16. So when you move that traffic over to that passing lane, you have parallel traffic from a stop coming onto Highway 16 from that on-ramp. And that is a very challenging and dangerous situation, in addition to the 140-degree turn. So I just wanted people to be aware of that also. Thank you.
One closing statement for me. To me, this is about people's property rights. And I've met with you folks 3 occasions. I met with the owner once. I've met with Ken Nash a couple times. And I've tried to just think about this, in an ideal world, the property would just remain just the way it is, in an ideal world. But taking into consideration property rights, I've tried to look at yours, and I've tried to look at the owners. And there was a compromise, general commercial, now we're down the highway service, and at one time under general commercial, the buyer was gonna deed over 3 acres. I mean, I've seen a lot of twisting and shoving and bending, trying to make everything work. I don't know that there's gonna be a right or wrong answer here, but my final decision would be based on your property rights along with the proposed buyer and the owner's property rights.
I do believe with the way this has drug out, and not that we wanted to drag it out, I do believe that we have presented enough information that everybody will be able to make an informed decision, and that's all I ask. I recognize they have rights, we have concerns, they have concerns, and again, I would ask you to take a look at all the information that you have in front of you, because I do think it's there to make an informed decision. Thank you.
Go ahead, PJ.
Sorry, just to follow up real quick on what Commissioner Roskinek said. Again, just a reminder, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the board. This still has 2 hearings before the board for a rezone, and then a 35-day waiting period for any appeals to court after that.
Understood. Thank you.
Hi, guys. My name is Leland Shemp, and I live out right at the Reptile Gardens. And we have thousands of visitors visiting that all summer long. And I was hoping that we would have no mining in that area. I'm sure you're familiar with that area. And if we would eliminate mining down there, it would really make a difference with all the thousands of tourists that come through there.
Excuse me, sir, are you speaking to item number 19, the rezone?
What?
Are you speaking to item number 19, the rezone of this property?
I live right there at, by the Reptile Garden. I have a area right there.
Okay, so your concern is the Highway Service District zoning would allow mining on this property?
What's that?
Your concern is that the Highway Service zoning would allow mining on this property?
Right.
Okay. You can go back to the podium and speak in the mic so everyone can hear you.
Yeah, I just want to make that comment if that, it'd be, in your,
Just gonna move this a little closer to you.
okay. Yeah. I was in your comprehensive planning, if you would keep that in mind, that there should be no mining down in that area with, by the Reptile Garden. That was my wish.
Okay,
Thank you much.
thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, the recommendation from staff is recommending approval of the rezone of 19-02 and comprehensive plan amendment CA 19-02. Is there a motion?
I would move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion.
You know, I'm not going to support that. And it's really, you know, I agree the traffic situation around Rockerville is not pretty. But you know, I take DOT at their word when they say that that their job is to ensure the safety of the highway as they work with the landowner to do what is necessary to maintain that safety. I agree that the wastewater and the well situation on the geology there is problematic, but once again, there are ordinances to ensure safety in that regard, and so whatever it takes, it's gonna take. But you know, I said this before, when this was before us, it's been 6 weeks ago probably now, is that the future land use being low-density residential, I think some consideration has to be given to that. And, I mean, for example, one suggestion that could have happened is that rather than 2 lots, there could have been 3 lots. There could have been the billboard lot along the highway. There could have been either general commercial or highway service, you know, whichever, through a portion of it. And then the back portion could be low-density residential to create kind of so that the current landowner is responsible for maintaining and creating kind of this buffer as you go back toward the residential area, the subdivision. So, and this proposal doesn't give any consideration to the future land use that's been on the books for quite a while right now. So for those reasons, I won't support it.
I have already stated my position on this.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
What was the motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, you are out. The motion is to recommend approval of the rezone 19-02 and comprehensive plan amendment 19-02. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Oh.
Better do roll call.
Rich,
I'm an aye.
Ron,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Kathy,
No.
Sandy,
No.
Sunny.
No.
3 yes and 3 no.
Okay,
Tie vote.
tie vote. Help me out here.
So the motion to approve fails,
Okay,
but that is the proposal and recommendation of the planning commission, which will go to the board.
okay, got it. Thank you. Thanks to everybody for your time. There was certainly a lot of discussion and items submitted and reviewed. So thanks again. Brings us to item number 20. Rezone 19-04 and comprehensive plan amendment 19-04.
Good afternoon. Jason Thennison, Planning and Zoning. Before I jump into agenda item number 20, I have an administrative note for you. In my staff report, I have under items 4 and 5, the maps for the 1 mile zoning are swapped around. I just wanted to make you aware of that to avoid any confusion. In my PowerPoint presentation, they will be
I'm
correct.
having a hard time hearing, excuse me. Could you speak up or speak a little closer? Thank you.
Sorry about that. Did you catch any of that? Or you want me to
I really
repeat?
didn't.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. All right, so just an administrative note, under items 4 and 5, shows current and future zoning within 1 mile. I have those maps switched in my staff report. In my presentation, that will be correct, so I just wanted to avoid any kind of confusion there. I'm gonna move over here.
Are we on 20?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
All right, agenda item number 20, so rezone and comprehensive plan amendment to rezone 15.69 acres from limited agriculture district to general commercial district, and to amend the Pennington County Comprehensive Plan to change future land use from limited agriculture to general commercial district. Applicant is Pat Foley. He is in the audience if you have any questions for him. Site location is South Highway 79, 3 miles south of Catron Boulevard. Applicant has submitted a request to rezone 2 properties totaling 15.69 acres from limited agriculture to general commercial district. Purpose of the rezone is to allow platting within the 3-mile platting jurisdiction of the city of Rapid City. First property, tax ID 52107, is 10 acres. It contains a permitted single-family residence. Second property is 54154. It's 5.69 acres. Contains a permitted 720 square foot detached garage, as well as a permitted pole barn. Both properties, current and future land use zoning is limited agriculture district. Both have existing access off Highway 79, and neither one have a special flood hazard area on the properties. Also, both carry with them Pennington County ordinance violation, case number 190038. For abandoned vehicles, trailers, and material. According to our records, the first notice of violation was sent March 20th, 2019. The second notice of violation was sent April 12th of 2019. I have some pictures of that. And here is the current 1-mile zoning. It contains low-density residential district, planned unit development, heavy industrial district, limited agriculture district, and general commercial district. This is the future 1-mile land use containing all the same districts. Applicant has requested to change the future land use of the subject properties from general agriculture district to general commercial. Applicant's request appears to be in harmony with the county's future land use designations in the areas. Both requests were sent out for interdepartmental review. Request for comment came in from County Ordinance Enforcement, notifying me of the Ordinance 106 violations. Also, the City of Rapid City Community Planning had a 2-part response stating that the city's future land use plan identifies the appropriate use of the property's agriculture. Rezoning the property to general commercial district is not in compliance with the plan. Second comment was South Dakota Highway 79 is identified as a principal arterial street on the city's major street plan. Any use of the property must be designated to ensure that it does not negatively impact South Dakota Highway 79 functioning as a principal arterial street. To follow up on that, this package was also routed to South Dakota Department of Transportation and no comments were received. Analysis of the application, there are several general commercial district properties within 1 mile with one bordering the subject properties. The applicant's request to rezone appears to be in harmony with the current and future land use zoning. However, that said, Mr. Foley has Ordinance 106 violations for abandoned vehicles, semi-trailers, and various other items affecting both properties. Staff has spoken to Mr. Foley, and he has indicated that he has a plan in place for the new buyers of the property to remove the items, but has provided no timeline related to that plan. With that, staff is seeking guidance from the Planning Commission on how to proceed with the rezone RZ 1904 and Comprehensive Plan Amendment CA 1904.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Regarding the 106 violations and the notice, what authority really does the county have to, enforce anything on those violations? Or tell me about how that works.
So 106 is not a zoning ordinance, it's actually a county ordinance. And then I'm sure it's probably more of a legal question, but the county ordinances, just like zoning ordinances, are approved by the board.
Right.
So,
But I mean, what's in this within the ordinance, what authorities are there to enforce it?
be more specific, other than the nuisance part.
Well, I guess I just am wondering, okay, so there is this notice of violation that was provided to the landowner some time ago. I mean, what authority does the county have to enforce cleaning it up, I guess? Requiring the landowner to clean it up?
Well, that is the essence of ordinance 106.
I
It's
know,
a nuisance
but how does
ordinance.
that work? Tell me how that works.
So we have a nuisance staff member or ordinance officer that their sole job is to follow up on zoning ordinances and ordinance 106. That is their job. And so when an ordinance is identified, usually either by staff when we're out on a site visit or from a complaint, which is most often the time, a complaint from a neighbor, then this individual will go out there and confirm whether that is actually a nuisance or not, or a zoning violation. Try to contact the landowners, either in writing or on the phone. And then if the landowner is not compliant, then we start with a process of letters that go out, first-class mail, certified letters with designated times in between. If the landowner still does not comply, ultimately, unfortunately, it will go up to the state's attorney's office.
I see.
We try to give them every opportunity we can to comply.
Right, and it's just one of the situations where, once it gets to the state's attorney's office, then, I mean, the county can take action to clean it up itself and assess the landowner for those.
Could be abated
Yeah.
if it's part of it, but once it gets up to the state's attorney's office, we're pretty much hands-off other than
Yeah,
providing
I
data.
see, okay.
Yep.
Very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
PJ, would this item be similar to the one that we talked about earlier today, where they wanted to take 3 parcels and replat those in the 2 parcels, but there is a ordinance 106 concern with Inskeep was the agent on Reno Gulch?
This might have been one I was out of the office for,
Anyhow,
meeting
there's
for, but
a lot of pictures of old buildings and bus and automobiles and I think they said that for one of the stipulations on that was that they had to take care of that ordinance 106 before I asked, this has been, that's been that way for years, but I think and it's always just kind of been looked at or grandfathered in, but once you do the rezone, this is where the county has some recourse to say, sure, we'll rezone it, but let's clean it up a little bit, so it looks a little more, 79 is a pretty major corridor, so.
correct. And my understanding with the issue in our office is because it is being requested to be rezoned where this type of, the items on the property would be a violation. And also the sale of the property is contingent on the rezone. And from my understanding is the current owner says the plan to clean up the property is with the new owner who won't buy it until it's rezoned. So you see where the violation comes in. So.
Jim, you
I
had a-
think that one difference is when we were doing that replatting, there was an opportunity to have conditions attached. And with the rezone, there's no conditions attached to it.
Correct. And and remember, this will be platted through the city.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, but, I mean,
we haven't put conditions on rezones, hardly ever, I think only recently once. It is possible, but we don't like doing it, because either it is or it isn't.
yes, that's right, I agree with that, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Jim, did you have a question?
What's that?
Jim, did you have a question?
I did, but I think it was sort of answered
Un-
in the
understood.
conversation.
Any further questions for staff?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Sonny.
So PJ, when there's an open violation, we can still rezone it with the open violation or not?
We don't want to,
Don't want to, but
because there is a violation on the property. We wouldn't allow any other permits being approved on this property if there's open violations.
so let's say if it was rezoned with the violation open, then the purchase of the property happened and the new owner would then be responsible for that violation, correct?
Correct. Landowner is ultimately responsible.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff?
Well, I'll just make a statement if I may.
Go ahead.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, PJ, about it's not generally a good idea to take different actions like rezoning with violations, but, it seems in this case, particularly since that it is a reasonable, we can hear from the applicant here, but because the violation goes with the property, there's a mechanism by which to abate this and then, collect the, assess the property. So it's not we're not giving away any recourse in terms of, abatement. And if there's a plan in place, I mean, it does seem like this would be a reasonable, way of moving forward.
Yeah, staff would just be against rezoning already in the negative. I mean, we would, if we were to recommend approval, we're recommending approval to a rezone with a known violation already existing.
No, I know.
So it's not what we have to do.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead,
Now I have
Jim.
a thought.
To give
All right.
you a
It seems like we could simply require that it be cleaned up now. And then a condition could be made between the present owner and the seller that this particular cost, if there's any cost involved, and that the sale might be contingent upon whether this violation is cleared up.
Hold
So
on,
if we just say,
sir.
we're not going to rezone it until you
Yeah,
clear
may I
it up,
speak?
then you can
Sir,
turn
hold
around
on.
to your buyer and say, look, here's what we're going to do.
Time out, sir, hold on. We're on questions to staff right now, and so I want Jim to make sure that he has all of his questions answered, and then we will immediately go to questions from the audience. So if you will hold tight just a
And
second.
I don't know that my statement is something that probably the applicant can answer better than the staff can. But, and
Okay.
that's an arrangement that he has the power to affect, we don't.
All right,
But it at least would give us some assurance that we would not end up with, unless we put a condition on, which I do think is kind of bad form. So I just think if we say, we're not going to rezone it until you clean this thing up, then he cleans it up, he comes back in 3 months or whatever. There's a lot of stuff here, but it seems to me it would be then easy to say, great, and we move on. I mean, that's just my feeling.
I understand. In my mind, the issue is, are we okay with the rezone or not okay with the rezone? If the violation doesn't go away and someone wants to buy that situation, then they have the capability of taking care of that situation. I guess I tend to, I like where you're going, but I tend to fall with Catherine's comments on that. Any other questions for staff before we
Mr.
move
Chair.
on? Go ahead, Rob.
So it's my understanding we're talking about property rights. And so if the buyer is aware that he could inherit a potential problem and he's willing to do that, then I really don't have a problem with the rezone. It's just going to be the buyer that's going to be responsible for cleaning it up as opposed to the seller, if I interpret it right.
I think that's probably the way I viewed it, but I have a feeling that if it's sold, we will see another 2 years expire before that violation is satisfied. And that's why I just think this would be an efficient and quick way to affect this.
Sure. Any other questions for staff? All right, sir, please state your name and go ahead.
To give you a little history on this property, when I bought it, it was a salvage yard. And I've had crushed numerous vehicles to get it cleaned up. And then.
Sir, for the record, are you Mr. Foley?
Pardon?
Are you Mr. Foley?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
And then I worked with DOT, traded property for control of access and things like that when they went through their process, and wound up with a lot of little skinny lots that weren't really buildable. And this property, I had 50 acres, of which the other 40 I don't own, but that 10 didn't have reasonable access. So that's why, if you draw a line across there, I'd have that 10 acres would become 13.85 or 6, whatever it is. And the part north of that would be approximately 2 acres. And the lot north of that is already zoned commercial,
and it's 2 acres. So, but you can't have 2 acres in limited ag. So that's an additional reason for, because this guy has to have access to the highway. And I do have DOT's approval for the access that was built there into that 10 acres. Only it would be enlarged, so he would go clear to the highway if you drew that line straight across, east and west. He would have frontage with that, and it would enlarge that. Now, the other thing is he'll bring business, a new business to town, money in our economy, and he has the manpower, the trucks, and the equipment. And he said he would help me outside of moving the double wide that's been there since it was new. And I have got bids from 2 movers so far, and I'm still waiting on 2 more house movers. They move it all in one unit because it's 27 by 48. That, he wants it cleared. It's going to be cleared for him to use it. He has to have it cleared. And that's the only way, and he's got I don't know if it's a brother-in-law or whoever's an attorney, is working on the paperwork. But this is an opportunity for me to have the help to get the job done. And I disagree with them giving me notice. It's been this way for years. I did get a packet from Amanda when I went in to apply for the rezone. Otherwise, it would have still been like that forever, or at least until somebody complained, and nobody was complaining. So, I'm not, and I could sit here and dicker about what's abandoned vehicles and what's vehicles that are just parked there. There are vehicles that aren't mine, and I don't want to waste your time, but there are vehicles that aren't mine. One man, a guy that worked for me, a heavy equipment mechanic at the ranch, built a fence, and he worked on small engines behind there. So I'm not going to have anybody complaining when we go load that up on a trailer and haul it down to the scrap iron place. And he does have 3 vehicles, and he's gone. I never saw him smoke or drink in his entire life that he worked for me for 20 years. But he got COPD, went from his house to the hospital, and he was gone just that fast. So, those are a problem. And there's a mechanic that's been working out there on the repairable cars. And he had somebody else's, about 3 or 4 of their cars. They've been noticed that they have to get them gone. And probably the garage that's there will be gone too. That was my last discussion with them. And there are poles sticking up, which was initially meant for an intended pole barn until things changed within the county. So it just stood there. And they're coming down. He wants it void of anything. And he has to have that. He initially found me on Google Earth. And he thought that 2 acres to the north that is commercial would be big enough for him, but it isn't. He can't turn around. And so he's going to flatten it, all of it. Well, first after we get it cleared, he's going to flatten it, all of it, so they can come in with their rigs and turn around and park them. And he can't do that with any of the things or objects that are there. If he elects to build a big garage to, do maintenance on his trucks or something, he'll come in and get a permit from you all, or from the planning and zoning. But without him, I'm dead in the water. And he'll just have to move on and find another piece of ground. But he wants, and that'll be one of the, his brother-in-law, wherever it is, relative that's an attorney. I'm sure he's going to have more cliffhangers in there than you can shake a stick at. They always do. So all of those things have been addressed. And the only thing that isn't is the zoning. And the zoning that we're asking for is commensurate with what's to the north on the east side of the road, the west side of the road, except there is heavy industrial behind the commercial up there a little ways. So this is only commercial. I don't know how it got designated a limited ag, because when I bought it, it was ag. So somehow they included me when they did the limited ag on the adjoining property, and I wasn't noticed. So it's a chance for me to get gone with it. I guess since I'm turned 76, it's time to take a day off and get rid of my ranch and everything. But I know this has to be cleaned up. There's no doubt in my mind he can't use it. And I can't do it by myself anymore. So I have him to help me. His equipment and his manpower. He's got everything we need to do it. And he and his other partner and their shop foreman, they've all been there and visited. They know what has to be done. I didn't try to pull any wool over anybody's eyes. So it's going to benefit all of us to have it done. And done now. And I'm not, it'd take me probably till I died to get it all cleaned up without their equipment. You know, I don't have any forklifts. Got a scraper, but you can't scrape up that stuff, cars. Got bulldozers, and all I can do is push it over in a draw. That isn't going to make it look any aesthetically any more pleasing. I've got a chance to get it done.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Are there any questions for Mr. Foley?
Mr. Foley, you've persuaded me. You've persuaded me, but don't disappoint us.
Oh, when I tell you I'm going to do something, unless he backs out on me, but I'm going to try to get a unrefundable deposit. I mean, their attorneys can do all this other stuff to me, but they can't get their deposit back. And that deposit will let me hire somebody else.
Staff is seeking guidance from the Planning Commission on how to proceed with this, so I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve his request to rezone the property.
And the comprehensive plan amendment?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion and a second? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're on item number 21, the ordinance amendment.
I have a couple copies of stuff people gave me. Can I make copies real quick and then give them to you?
No problem.
And I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I have another commitment, so I will have to leave here at 1. So I don't know if we take lunch breaks or whatever, but I will have to leave at 1, no matter where we are in the process.
Okay.
And this is also scheduled, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, to be heard also May 13th. So if we don't get through it all today,
Okay.
I think there's way too much to do it today, because there's a huge section that we haven't even talked about yet, which to devote one whole meeting to.
So do we want to go until 12:45 and cut it off?
Yeah.
Thoughts from the group?
Good idea.
Okay. All right. It's my understanding that there were a few other comments that have come in since the last meeting when we discussed these items. However, we had gotten all the way through chapter 9. Is that correct, PJ?
Correct. I believe we stopped on number 63 of the matrix. That was, because I have on 62, I have a no change from the Planning Commission. And then coming up to 63, 4, 5, and 6, there's no other comments that I have written down.
So you think we made it to 63?
Yes, and I do have some additional comments on 63 after we go through number 63, because that's the only one left for Chapter 9.
Okay. Do we want to take these comments that came in this morning first? Are those the ones you're talking about, PJ?
No, those are for Chapter 10, the one that have to do with mining.
Okay.
Those are Chapter 10. The two that came in this, that I gave you this morning are actually, one is from Jerome Harvey and the other is Dustin Willett, our fire coordinator and emergency manager. There was a comment that came in from Mr. Richard Bell on April 18th, referencing page 9-8 and 9-12. Mr. Bell states that 9-8 says, due to hazards found at home, the county educates residents on proper hazardous waste storage and disposal. The county also hosts household hazardous waste events where household hazardous waste is collected and safely disposed of. He would like to add, Mr. Bell would please add at least once annually, because the last one was held in 2017. So I took that comment and routed it over to the county staff that would oversee that. And that comment is in the email that I gave you copies of, where Dustin Willett mentions hazmat collection annually would be fine to include. It's just a cost issue. Each household hazardous waste collection event currently costs $50,000 to $60,000.
Significant.
So
That's
if
a
you want to take
significant
that,
cost.
yeah. So again, that comes from page 9-8. And it's the middle paragraph right above where it says military compatibility. So the citizen is asking that it be done annually. And then Mr. Willett is saying that's fine, it's just going to cost $50,000 to $60,000 every time.
That's a significant amount of money. Any comments from the group on that?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Sonny.
I'm familiar with this because I tried to do some hazardous waste disposal last year, and I was told how expensive it was and that they weren't doing it last year. But apparently, there's also nowhere that we can take our stuff until this company, an out-of-state company, comes in and picks it all up. That's what the $50,000 to $60,000 ticket price is, I believe. It's for this other company. I would like to see if there was some place that people could take their stuff, and then once it needed to be collected, then hire that company instead of doing it on an annual basis. That's just an idea that I want to throw out there.
Like a hazmat disposal site or drop-off, or?
Something like a drop-off, yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Could somebody explain to me what exactly constitutes hazardous waste?
A lot of stuff.
I mean asbestos or,
Well, that's definitely one.
I'm sorry, what?
I'll say that's definitely one.
But in this context, it's like household products that, like chemicals that you buy for cleaning or paint or solvents or, that kind of thing that you're not supposed to put in the trash, the solid waste trash.
Ah.
You're not supposed to dump out on your ground. And so it's.
People are expected to keep this stuff, like I got it stored up in my garage. Imagine all the people that have stuff stored up in their garage. And then if there was
It's
an
a
event
problem.
that's something like a natural disaster, then it's all in our water. And if you don't have a place to take it, people don't want to keep it in their garage. They might find some other way to deal with it. So I think it is a good idea that we try to find a way that there's some kind of a intermediate step between the home and the company that picks it up.
The goal, let's see, it's the goal HS 3.4. It seems to me that's the goal statement that is really the companion to what we're just talking about. The county will continue to host household hazardous waste events in which household hazardous waste is collected from residents for proper disposal. And
Is that actually done?
Well, that's what we were saying. 2017 was the last time.
Oh, yeah.
But, because I called just recently, I had on my calendar, call the first, because it happens this time. And they told me they're not doing it this year.
This year too.
That's what they told me.
I think they do it for only like 2 days, so if a person
Yeah,
misses it, then
but-
we're gonna wait another 2 or 3 years.
So, I'm speaking a little off the cuff here, because I haven't really thought about this, but, we've never really worried about the costs of these different items in the previous things. So I don't know if we really need to start worrying about costs right now.
No.
But on the other hand, maybe the way to phrase this is that, the frequency, whether it be annually or every 2 years or whatever, that's something that should be established to meet the need. Really, the frequency should meet the need. And maybe what you're saying, Sonny, is there could be a drop-off place, and then periodically it could be disposed of, or, whatever might be more cost-effective. But I think rather than, I understand the issue about annually, but, maybe we could add to 3.4, something like will be collected, to meet the
Even-
need.
Well, yeah, or at regular intervals or something. That just implies that if you do it once every 10 years, you're okay. So, yeah, it seems like there ought to be some effort to encourage a little more frequent. And like you say, if it gets to the point where people respond to this and all their hazardous materials are disposed of, and nobody shows up on, the next event, then they can cut it back. But I have to agree with Sonny. I'm stunned at how much crap I have in my garage that's hazardous, and I don't quite know what to do with it. So,
So are you suggesting a change to item 3.4?
Yes, I guess so, in response to the comment, but I guess my suggestion would be not to necessarily specify annually, but we'll continue, or we'll host household hazardous waste events, in which is collected from residents for proper disposal, to meet the need of the county residents or something.
That makes sense.
I'm not opposed to any words like that. I'm not sure how the storing of hazardous waste, if that would be something the county would want to get in the business of doing, or what the legal implications of storing hazardous waste. But certainly having the collection events seems like a positive step for getting those things addressed. The question is always the cost and the frequency. So I'm okay with the change made on 3.4.
What would that change be?
Go ahead,
Add the
Kathy.
word regular or annual?
Oh, I guess, well, I'm not really fussy about what it is, but I would say the county will continue to host household hazardous waste events in which the household hazardous waste is collected from residents for proper disposal to fit or to meet the needs of the residents or something. So leave it rather open-ended, but make the point of is that the county should do this to meet the needs of the residents, so.
I think what this is missing is any kind of timeline at all. Of course, the county's gonna host the event, but when? So maybe as simple as the word, add the word regularly, or
Yeah, and that's
it can't be
okay
too
with me,
specific, but we need to
Yeah.
put something, I think, in there.
That's okay with me. I just think that rather than being too prescriptive, like saying annually or something, have some language that says, this is a need of the county, and we need to take care of it in some way.
If you'd like, I can get with Dustin Willett, have him come up with some proposals of new language and bring that to the next meeting.
That's a good idea.
That works.
Good idea.
Say, Kathy, could we, at the end of that, include as needed, on an as-needed basis?
That'd be okay with me too. Yeah.
I think it'll be good to get that feedback from, sorry, who was it in the county?
Dustin Willett.
From Dustin, because I don't think we have enough information to know the capacity of what the county's able to do, other than we know that cost of bringing in that outside company is really high. If there's like a place or a way that materials could be stored in the meantime, I think that's what we need to know.
Any other comments on chapter 9?
Yes, sir. The other comment that came in from Mr. Bell was on page 9-12, HS 3.9, which is on the screens, 3.9, which reads, the county should encourage, the county should encourage and participate in voluntary inspections of residential homes, particularly those occupied by the elderly or handicapped, including education on the proper use of residential smoke detectors. I routed this over to Jerome Harvey, our county fire coordinator. His reply is county fire agrees with adding and the rest that Mr. Bell says is he would like to add in and carbon monoxide detectors at the end of the sentence, so right after where it says smoke detectors. Mr. Harvey comments that county fire agrees with adding carbon monoxide detectors. Most campaigns to install detectors are funded to install smoke detectors in the demographics mentioned, i.e. the Red Cross smoke detector campaign, and then he just recited what Mr. Bell had said. So if you were okay with that, we could just add that and smoke detectors to
And
the
smoke
end of that.
detectors? Okay.
I'm Mr. Bell. May I speak?
Oh, hi. Hope I represented you okay.
Yeah, you did fine. I wanted to get just Richard Bell, and
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I just got to looking at this draft report last week, so I know you're pretty far along in the process. But could I go back to 9.8 a minute with when I talked about once annually on the hazardous waste collection? And the only thing I would say is it may be quite an expense, but I think without putting a timeline in there, the county can punt the thing down the road and say regular or whatever as needed. There's no definition on how that's to be determined. There's no polling of residents. I'm an environmental engineer, and I know, as you all have said, there's lots of stuff people have stored around. And if there's no place to take it, then what happens is it goes where it's not supposed to go. So it's going to cost the county a lot more than $50,000 or $60,000 to clean up stuff in ditches and wherever else it gets dumped. And I think you ought to just recognize that in this day and age, that's what it takes. The county, if they have some kind of storage, there is a limit on how long you can store hazardous waste. There's a grandfather for individual people, but if the county were to take that on, I think it's 180 days or something like that. So I'm not familiar exactly with the federal regulations on storage of hazardous waste, but I don't think you want to get into that business. I think you want to take care of it and do this as a service to the residents of this county. And so I would encourage you, and that's why I said once annually, because I think it's really important to specify at least, and if you want to make it every other year, but make sure it happens, because it hadn't happened since 17. I was told it might not happen again this year. That's too long. So really, I would just encourage you to actually specify a regular time period in which you would have that done. And I apologize, but I have a 1 o'clock meeting. I had some items on number 10.
Yeah.
And so if you guys want to just, give it to Holly, or I think I've already submitted to the UPJ, so.
Yep, and also, Mr. Willett is on his way down. We were just able to get him on the phone, so.
Okay. So, thank
can
you.
address
Thank
that
you,
for you.
everyone.
Thank you. Do we want to go on while we're waiting for Dustin?
Sure. I believe that's all I had from chapter 9. As far as comments that have come in, except for number 30 or 63 on page 13 or 14 of the matrix, which is Kathy, I believe it's your comment about page 9-14, HS 8.1.
Right. Did you get some more information on?
We did not.
Well, I think they use the word participation again in their language, which I agree.
Yeah.
That tends to mean financial
Right.
partnership, right?
Right.
And but they may not have meant that. So, no change recommended. Part of the J-Luce programs reviewed with county only states possible participation by the county. But I agree with you. The county shouldn't be strapped for that
Financially.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Right now, the only way that we participate, at least from the level of the office, is in any meetings or presentations that either the Ellsworth Developmental Authority or members of Ellsworth Air Force Base particularly hold for us. I know, well, I don't know if Commissioner Roskinek would know, is there a commissioner that's still kind of like the point person for the developmental authority meetings? I don't remember if that's still, there is, Holly's nodding.
There is, I'm probably guessing it might be Gary, one of our newer commissioners.
Okay. I don't know how often they've met, but when they were doing the new J-Luce, the Joint Land Use Study back in 2016, we were meeting probably once a month, and I believe at that time it was Commissioner Troutman and myself.
I did go, I do a lot of work with Superfund kind of sites, and that word participate has very specific meaning, and it means financial part. So maybe we could just, since we don't really want that to be the case, just think about the proper language there. So.
Okay. So something that's non-financial based.
Yes.
Okay.
I see that Mr. Willett is here, so let's circle back. Come on up, sir. Thank you.
You bet. Good afternoon, Commission. Dustin Willett, Director of Emergency Management, Rapid City, Pennington County. So Holly called me. What can I?
Yeah, so the question was in regards to the hazardous waste collection and how often that should happen, and maybe some help on the recommended language for that. And so right now, the language states on the goal, the county will continue to host household hazardous waste events in which household hazardous waste is collected from residents for proper disposal. Just to bring you up to speed, there was some comments about potentially having a collection site that then, we would only spend the money once the collection site had enough material in it, and or how regularly we should just have this company come and collect these things. And noting your cost estimates of $50,000 to $60,000 per event for someone to come. So
So the way that's worked in the past is it's a partnership, a cost-sharing partnership between multiple entities coordinated through Pennington County LEPC, the Local Emergency Planning Committee, which my staff, my office helps coordinate, but that's an entity under the county that's established by federal regulation. But anyway, that's kind of the coordinating entity. The last several events, the City of Rapid City landfill has actually been the heavy lift on that. They've actually provided most of the money, $30,000+. And so what happens there is you do have to bring a contract company in. So typically the one we use, I don't remember the name off the top of my head. I think they come out of Colorado. But we partner with the fairgrounds for space, and the contractors come in with all of their trucks and equipment set up, and people literally just drive into the fairgrounds, unload, drop off what they have, and drive out of the fairgrounds. The company collects all of it, weighs all of it, classifies all of it, and then hauls it out and disposes of it properly. There's no, I shouldn't use that language, that's not correct. It would be expensive and problematic for us to set up a permanent warehousing of people, hey, bring your bad nasties and we'll sit on it until there's enough to, that type of system would give me great pause, having a permanent site where we collect hazardous materials. That probably not undoable, but certainly would take a lot more looking into, and I foresee that being pretty problematic. Setting this up where members of the community can come, and when people call and say, hey, we have this, what do I do with it? Our advice right now is, well, we have one scheduled in 19 or 22 or whenever we have that scheduled, and
Close
you
the
guys,
garage door, huh?
You guys sit on that liability rather than us sitting on that liability. Now, does that mean some of it gets disposed of improperly? I can't speak to that. I can only assume what human behavior is or isn't. But we do what we can do in the community in terms of how often the partners are able to come together, how often we're able to fund the cost of bringing that type of operation in. And over the last decade, that's worked out to every couple to few years. Every 2 to 3 years, we're able to bring that in and offer that to the community. And I think the last time we did it, and I apologize for not having the numbers in front of me, so I apologize if I speak inaccurately here, but I want to say the last time we did this, it was 20-plus thousand pounds of hazardous materials that we shipped out.
So the need is there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
did I get correct information? I called the landfill and asked them if they were doing one this, because they typically do it in May, and they didn't think so. Is that right information, or?
I would have to go call and look.
Okay, so you're not aware that,
I don't know if we're doing one this year or if it's next year. I
see,
truly
okay.
don't.
All right.
If we added, not on as needed, but on the scheduled, use the word schedule, because obviously this is based on a schedule. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's not as needed because we probably need it every year. But if we say on a scheduled basis, we just, whatever that schedule is, that's when it's going to be.
I mean, there's a lot of communities that don't do it at all. We're of a size that our local emergency planning committee, our LEPC, thinks it's reasonable and prudent, and obviously with the amount that we collect during those events, the need is there. The flip side of that is when you don't host those events, the materials get disposed of improperly. And so it's an attempt by the local emergency planning committee and Rapid City Landfill and all of those partners. It's an attempt to not have those chemicals introduced improperly into the environment. So it's a tool that we use to try to limit the improper disposal of that. If we could afford to do it every year, it'd be great to do it every year. But the costs are significant, and no one's able to at this point, foot that bill every single year to do that event. We do it as often as we're able.
What is the duration of the event?
1 day.
And is there a capacity, like how does it work when this Colorado company comes in, they're able to take away so much? You said something like 20,000 pounds last time. Was that to capacity, or?
We never tapped out. They've always been able to take what the community drops off. So we haven't reached a capacity yet. I don't know if we would or not. I can't necessarily speak to that, but we've never filled up their trucks completely.
Well, I ask that because I wonder why it appears maybe 2 years have been skipped. And how is that schedule made? Like who's responsible for scheduling this event?
It's a collaboration through, again, that local emergency planning committee. When that comes together, we come together quarterly and talk about what we want to try to do in the community and what we have funds to be able to do. And it comes, again, the last several years, it's been the city that does the heavy lift. And it's a question of who has the budget to do the heavy lift on bringing an event in.
Okay.
As I said before, we've not been considering cost implications for all of these different goal statements, even though sometimes I thought we should. But, so I don't know if that should be our concern on this one.
It's a great thing to include as what we want to do. And my understanding, the comprehensive plan is a vision of 2040. What would we like? What do we want to do as a community? And having people be able to appropriately dispose of hazardous waste rather than introduce that into our environment is a fantastic, noble vision that I would wholly support. How we make all these things in the comprehensive plan come to fruition, again, I think is another conversation and a challenge, but the intent of having people be able to appropriately dispose of household hazardous waste is a good one.
Who heads or organizes this committee, and when does it happen?
So it's quarterly. The president, I think, is elected. It's a board. It runs. I think the president is elected for a 2-year term, and there's a president-elect and vice president. My staff, I serve as the secretary-treasurer, pretty much standing. I don't necessarily get reelected. I'm just standing secretary-treasurer of that. But we host it here in the Emergency Operations Center quarterly. Certainly a public meeting, open meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, so prior to Mr. Willett coming here, the Planning Commission had said it was okay that I get with Mr. Willett and he draft up how he could envision it. Now that he's heard your comments, is that still the wish of the Planning Commission that he could go back, possibly draft up something? We could bring that forward to the next meeting?
I think so. I mean, to stay with the goal of the, I see this as the vision statement here still very applicable. The question is do we saddle ourselves with specific dates and times and all those other things in this document? And I guess I don't necessarily see that. But yes, if you would take a look at item 3.4 and we would be open to your recommended language for that item based on the conversation, the email from the landowner or from the, does anybody have any concerns with that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Obviously, when people have, typically what we get is an estate. So when people come in to clear out an estate, they open a garage or a barn and find barrels of who knows what, and so we get relatively frantic calls of, hey, we're trying to liquidate this now, we need to get rid of it now. And so there is a lot of frustration sometimes with community members that want to be able to dispose appropriately of something in the short term, and there just isn't a reasonable accommodation for that currently. We just don't have the systems in place to be able to respond that quickly. So, yeah, be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for pulling you out last minute.
No problem at all.
I appreciate it.
Well, we're past our 12:45 time, so do we want to push the pause button on this till the next meeting?
I'd like to make a motion.
I'm sorry, what, Sonny?
I can make a motion
Okay.
to continue ordinance amendment 1901 to the May 13th meeting.
Second?
Is that right?
Motion and a second. Is it further discussion? Go ahead, PJ.
My only discussion point is that I will not be here on
Okay.
that date, so
Okay.
I'll be out of town. Thank you.
If I remember right, we were supposed to send all of our comments to Matrix and then they were going to draft the final document. And so do we need to set up another meeting after May 13th?
Well, what I was going to caution is if we could schedule 2 meetings, just in case. Because if you don't finish the next meeting, then to re-advertise for you to continue hearing it is going to take another month. So if we were to do a proposal for May 13th, and then also if needed, May 28th, which is a Tuesday, because of the Memorial Day closing, then we at least would cover our bases in case we don't finish next meeting, because we still haven't gone over the map of all the zoning changes. But what's going to happen is when the planning commission is finished, then all of those changes will go to Matrix. They're going to produce a new document showing what was originally there and the new changes. And then that's going to come back before the board or the planning commission for a final recommendation. So between the time of when you finish your review to before you get that new document, that's a minimum 4 weeks, because we have to re-advertise that, and Matrix also has to go back and make all the changes. So just as an abundance of caution, if the motion could include the 2 next meetings in May, the second one if needed. That way, if you don't finish the review next meeting, we're not waiting for another month for the next review. It's all about advertising.
I would go to the
Okay.
motioner
Yeah, I'll accept that motion.
for May 13th and May 28th.
Correct.
And the person that's second?
Second.
Motion and second, further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, those no. Motion carries. We are on the county board report, item 22.
The Board of Commissioners concurred with the Planning Commission's recommendations from the April 8th, 2019 Board of Commissioners meeting.
Okay. Seeing no public, we're on item number 24, items from the staff.
Sure. Just a reminder that the special Planning Commission meeting for the Kroll Ready Mix permit is still scheduled for Wednesday, May 8th, starting at 3 p.m. And I do have one additional item after that. Sorry, I'll make it quick.
Go ahead.
Also, as Mr. Nybel had stated earlier, 3 members of the Planning Department plus Commissioner Rivers attended the South Dakota DOT's erosion and sediment control training. It was a 2-day class held at Ramcota with an exam afterwards where then you become certified as one of their, certified in erosion and sediment control for the state. The classes are geared towards South Dakota DOT inspectors. but there is an abundant amount of information which is very relevant and important for us. And I'm really, I mean, and I talked with Mr. Nibel about this, and I believe I emailed you on this. It seemed like that course has changed him, not only because of the financial implications, but also of like, wow, this is not that hard to do. And so we had good conversations with him during the meeting. One thing that is coming out of this, and I believe also that Mr. Nibel had indicated, and we had all talked about at the meeting, is taking that 2-day course and breaking it down to maybe a 6-hour or 8-hour course that the planning department hosts every 3 years or 4 years, like we do with the on-site wastewater treatment inspector training, where participants pay to attend, and then we pay for an instructor to come in, because the top instructor in the country is right out of Minnesota, and he's the one that teaches all the ones in our state. He's very good, he's very thorough, he keeps it entertaining, and if we were to take out all the stuff about how to properly mitigate a highway project, I think we can cut it down to about 6 hours. But everybody from planning department passed the test with a 98% or higher. Mr. Nibel said he passed with a 96. Sunday's the only one we have a question about. But that's it. So we are looking to make that kind of a minimum mandatory training in the future, not immediate.
So, PJ, anybody can go to that course, and is there a fee?
There is a fee, 250, 150 per person.
Okay.
Yeah, it's offered 4 times a year in South Dakota. I don't know where else they offer it, but we usually go to the one when it's held here. And we kind of rotate staff through it, because it's good for 3 years, but they're possibly looking at it being good for 4 years.
Looked like it was good material.
Very good.
Okay, items from the membership.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead,
I'd
Kathy.
just like to make everyone aware, I have jury duty in May. And so I may be at all of the meetings, but, you know, could be that I don't make some. So just so you know, Jerry, I have jury duty. And I'll keep you posted when I make my call Friday night to see how Monday looks, but.
I don't think we will be rescheduling the May 8th meeting if you can't attend.
No, please don't.
I think it's moving forward.
Just so you know.
Okay.
I'm in panel 13. Hopefully that is not my unlucky number.
Oh, wow.
Doesn't sound good, Kev.
I know it.
And sorry if I may.
Go ahead,
One final thing, I just want a big public thank you for Brittany Molitor for coming in today. Today was actually a vacation day for her, but she came in because of the items that were going to be talked about this morning, so.
Good. Anything else? If not, I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries.
Thank you.